How is everyone doing tonight? You are in the strategy room here with the doctor next, the banker, actually, the banker next door, Dr. Joe Berquist. Here on this Saturday night, April 25th, 2026. So I hope everyone is having a great weekend out there so far. We got a lot of stuff to talk about tonight. We're going to take a look at a lot of the numbers. We're going to take a look at, bonds, treasury notes, yields, interest rates, all that good fun stuff. We're going to be talking a lot about the DOJ just dropped the investigation into Jeremy Powell. So we're going to be talking about that a little bit. Kevin Warsh, hopefully the next chairman of the Federal Reserve, he had his confirmation hearing this week. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. I've got an update on private credit. I also have a lot of banking news and just interesting things that happened throughout the week. One of the big stories, Tim Cook deciding to step down as CEO of Apple. That was big news this week. But without further ado, we will jump right in to what we usually like to look at here, and that is the U.S. debt clock, as we always like to start out with every week. So, U.S. national debt still hovering at $39.1 trillion. That is debt per citizen of $113,970, debt per taxpayer of $357,069. U.S. federal spending is currently at $7.1 trillion, with the U.S. federal budget deficit at $1.674 trillion. So, U.S. Treasury Reserve up about $31 trillion, and refund per taxpayer is approximately 83,384. So the debt to GDP is at almost at 125%. We are just a hair under that at 124.89. So defense spending up to $935 billion. Interest on the national debt, like I had said last week, it took us a while, but we finally crossed the $1 trillion mark last week, and now we're just a hair over $1 trillion on the national debt, and that is money just to service the national debt. That does not pay down $1 of this $39.1 trillion. We spend $1 trillion now just to service the $39.1 trillion. Credit card debt still up to $1.345 trillion, and that equates to $8,271 per credit card holder. So those are some of the key numbers that we always like to take a look in on. Now, let's take a look at how did things go this week. Stock market had generally a pretty good week this week. Nothing real. I'm just gonna make this. You know what? Let me try to make that a little bit bigger and see if I can. Can I slide that in? Nah, that's a little bit too big. Hold on. All right, there we go. Okay. Let's go with that. All right. So we had stocks here. The Dow was down a little bit on Friday, but I think it was up pretty much for the week. NASDAQ and the S&P 500 were up for the week. So another basically winning week in stocks here. Let's take a look at bonds for a second. So the Treasury notes this week were basically all up a little bit. You can see here that basically the 10-year note is at 4.307. That's up just a little bit from where we were at. If we go back about 5 days here, we were down to about 4.25, and now it's back up to about 4.307. So basically everything was up just a little bit this week. We see the 30-year bond there is at 4.9%. The 7-year notes at 4.102. The 5-year note is at 3.925. The 2-year is at 3.791. And like I've been pointing out for probably about the last month or so now, when you look at the shorter bills, the shorter T-bills, the 1-year T-bill, the 6-month, the 3-month, the 1 month, they are all trading in this massively tight band of basically about 3.6%, 3.6%, 3.7%. But not much of a difference there, which is just, like I said, it's very interesting. I mean, usually there's at least a little bit, but there's just not much. They're all trading within that same bandwidth. So we'll continue to keep an eye on that. Let's go over to commodities. So oil futures and Brent futures dropping below $100, which is good. I will have some more Iran information here in just a minute. We're going to talk a little bit about oil there as part of that conversation for just a second. Just to note, gold futures, gold came down a lot. I think, gold was over 5,200 and dropped all the way back down to, I think, about 4,400 if we go to the 3 month here. So yeah, we were at a high of about 5,250 back at the end of January, and then it dropped all the way down to 4,376 here at the end of March, and it's bounced back a little bit up to 47.25. Same thing, kind of thing here with silver. So silver was up, up almost, I think, 115, $118. Yeah, $115 there at the end of January. Dropped all the way down to $67 and has bounced back up to 75. So a little bit of a roller coaster there on gold and silver, but they have both bounced back a little bit there. But like I said, the important thing here was that the crude oil futures and the Brent crude futures were both back down under $100. Brent not just barely at $99.93, but again, still kind of a psychological barrier, if you will, kind of coming down back under that $100 mark. So now I'm going to come back to that in just a minute, but we'll get back to that for just a second. So let's take a look at mortgage rates real quick. So last Saturday, we had reported that mortgage rates had hit their lowest point in 5 weeks as Middle East tensions began to ebb. This week, Middle East tensions have ratcheted back up along with mortgage rates. The good news is that rates aren't up all that much from a week ago. According to the Zillow Lender Marketplace, the current 30-year fixed rate is at 6.09%. Up 7 basis points from last week. Meanwhile, the 15-year fixed rate is up 8 basis points from last weekend to 5.58%. So again, 30-year fixed rate mortgage 6.09%, the 15-year fixed rate at 5.58%, 5/1 ARM at 6.07%. The 30-year VA mortgage at 5.63. So again, rates holding very steady. Up just a hair, up just a little bit from last week, but still like nothing horrific. Still, like I said, still hanging around that basically that 6% band, if you will, which is great. And then looking at refinance rates, 30-year fixed is at 6.14%. The 15-year is at 5.63. 5/1 ARMs at 5.99%, and then the 30-year VA is at 5.62. So again, still very good, very decent rates out there. Nothing really catastrophic happening with the mortgage rates. Everything kind of hanging in there. Like I said, we saw the T-bills, everything kind of ratcheted up just a little bit this week, and then thus we see the mortgage rates go up just a little bit. And now, why did that all happen, right? So we'll go into our first story of the week here. So, and I'm going to run through a couple of these real quick because I know everybody's gotten kind of beaten over the head with all this Iran, the story and everything. That's all you hear about all week long on on all the news shows, everything else. So like I said, I don't want to kind of beat a dead horse in a sense, but I do need to touch on this just a little bit because it does feed into some of the other things that we talk about throughout the evening. So the Strait of Hormuz remains basically closed as Iran seizes ships after Trump's ceasefire extension. So the Strait of Hormuz has not broadly opened to ship traffic after President Donald Trump extended the ceasefire with Iran. Iran is still trying to control ship traffic in the sea lane while the U.S. maintains its blockade of Tehran's ports and vessels. Then we get to U.S.-Iran war evolves into naval standoff over Strait of Hormuz after both countries seize ships. So the U.S. and Iran are seizing ships as the war has evolved into a confrontation of naval blockades during the ceasefire. Oil tanker traffic through the Strait of Hormuz remains very low due to the blockades. It is unclear how long the ceasefire can hold before the naval standoff between the U.S. and Iran turns into a shooting war again. So yeah, good question. Then we get to, this was as of today. So this is kind of breaking news as of today. So Trump cancels U.S. envoy trip to Pakistan for Iran war negotiations. If they want to talk, all they have to do is call. So President Donald Trump canceled plans to send a U.S. special envoy of Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner to Pakistan to discuss the ceasefire in Iran. Iran Foreign Minister Abbas Gachi met with Pakistan's military chief in Islamabad early Saturday. Iranian Foreign Minister spokesperson Ismail Bakwai said that no meeting is planned to take place between Iran and the U.S. Reuters, citing two Pakistani government sources, said the Iranian delegation then left the country. So not too great there for this event. Now, does this mean that they're basically going to start shooting at each other tomorrow or next week? I don't think so. I really don't. And this is why, because we're going to go in here. I do want to make this a little bit bigger so that hopefully everybody can kind of see this. So these charts show how Iran's economy is in free fall. So the conflict in the Middle East is plunging an already fragile Iranian economy into free fall. The International Monetary Fund estimates that the Iranian economy will shrink by 6.1% in 2026. The regime in Tehran is not blind to the turmoil its economy is in, with senior officials warning that it may take more than a decade to rebuild the war-shattered economy. So let's take a look at a couple of these charts. So here's the first one right here. So Iran's currency plummets to record low amid Western sanctions, political instability. So you could just see here how basically starting in probably about mid-January here. No, a little after the beginning of the year. I mean, you could just see here that basically Iran's currency has just absolutely plunged. And what is interesting is that if anybody watches or has checked out the cryptocurrency that I do, one of the kind of continuing stories that I've talked about in the last, 3 or 4 episodes of the crypto series is that how I talked about Venezuela, but also about how Iran is basically using cryptocurrency in their country to get around this. And it's a great, Iran is an incredible case study for the use of different cryptocurrencies. And one of the things that I pointed out there is that Binance, a company that had kind of got out of its troubles, was back in trouble again because they had flowed like $1 trillion. They had helped Iran move like $1 trillion through their exchange to different places, and now they had opened up. The people internally had started at Binance and started to investigate it, but then they fired all the people, and then I think it was the DOJ has basically gotten back in there now and is basically trying to look into seeing what's going on. But that is how Iran is getting around this. They're using cryptocurrency to get around. They're trying to use stable coins, trying to use Bitcoin, some other cryptocurrencies, but that's how they are effectively getting around this. And it's a double-edged sword because the people of Iran are using it, and it's helping them just to buy everyday things, right? So you feel bad for the people there because you want them to have their medium of exchange, if you will, that they basically can go out and just buy the things they need to live and survive. But at the same time, you also know that it's being used to keep the government rolling, and that obviously is an issue. So then we'll go down here. Let's take a look at a couple more charts here. So Iran's economy is crumbling under the weight of the war. You can see that inflation has popped to over almost 70% this year. I mean, that's just a massive increase in inflation. Their GDP is down 6.07%. So just have a monster inflation, collapse of their currency, collapse of the GDP. Unemployment has spiked up to 9.2%. I'm actually surprised that it's not a lot higher than that. And then you get to, government debt. Their government debt to GDP is at 37.3%. That's still not horrific. I mean, compared to us at almost 125%, that's actually 37.3%. They're actually still not doing too bad there. So that's the one area that the debt to GDP is the one area they're not doing too bad. However, that might change depending on how long this lasts, right? How long this goes on. So I think the point here, the reason why I'm showing everybody these charts is just because I'm trying to drive home the point here where economically they're not going to be able to hold out that much longer. I mean, this blockade, it basically they're shutting off the revenue stream and the income into Iran. And basically, if they can find a way to shut down some of the cryptocurrency things that are going on, then that is, I think, basically game over at that point. I mean, their economy is just going to continue to implode. Now you're looking at now you're looking at major problems of people, mass amounts of people out of work, mass amounts of people not having the food and stuff that they need, and now you've got upheaval. Now you've got a lot of pushback from people in the street. I mean, that's basically where this eventually is all going to lead. The question is, like, how long does that take, right? Does that take a day, a week, a couple months? Like, I don't know. We might have a partial answer on that here, right here, as Kalshi traders don't see the Strait of Hormuz traffic returning to normal until July. So that could be at least a little bit of insight. I mean, again, I'm not going to say Kalshi's like this perfect predictor of anything, but that at least gives us to maybe a little bit of insight as to what people are betting is going to happen. Bettors on prediction markets platform Kalshi now see the chances of traffic in the Strait of Hormuz returning to normal in June as below 50%. Those bettors think there's a 59% chance traffic is back to normal by July and a 61% chance by August. Kalshi defines normal traffic as transit through the strait crossing 60 ships based on a 7-day moving average from IMF Port Watch. And I believe the normal number of ships moving through the strait, like daily traffic, was probably about 90 to 100 ships. I think that was normal. Somebody, if anybody wants to comment on that in the comments section, let me know if that is if anybody wants to fact check me on that one. But like I said, I believe it was somewhere in that neighborhood, like 90, 100, 110 ships a day, something like that, going through the strait. So, and they're saying that basically they would define like a normal traffic flow as 60 ships on a 7-day moving average heading through the strait. Now, here's another interesting thing to think about, though, with the strait, right? So, I thought I had a picture of the strait in here. It is. Okay. So here's one of the interesting things about this strait here, right? So they kind of move through the strait. Now, there are other countries are beginning to reroute and run other pipelines to other areas. So basically, there probably will come a day in the not too distant future where the strait will be totally irrelevant because there's going to be other pipelines running to other ports in different areas through these various countries, and it's gonna negate this. It's gonna negate Iran's ability to do anything like this in the future. Like the strait will basically become irrelevant because the pipelines will flow to different ports, which do not have this bottleneck, do not have this issue. However, the problem there, the but there with that is that how long does that take? We don't know. It could be that could take months, could take years, like we don't know. But I just say that to say that the day will come where this whole situation here will be completely irrelevant because the oil will be flowing from a lot of these Gulf countries just to other ports and other venues where they'll be able to load up their ships and go, and they're going to be able to bypass the strait, and it's just not going to be a relevant thing anymore. So I know that doesn't necessarily help us right this minute, but I'm just pointing out where this eventually goes at some point. So again, I mean, we'll keep an eye on it and see what happens. But my guess is that, by these economic numbers and by what we're seeing here, my guess is that the blockade is working. It's doing what they want it to do. And I think the question is now we're just into we're basically into like a test of wills. Who's gonna crack, first here in this thing? Is the US basically gonna give up and say, okay, we're done. We're just gonna go home now because we tried to do this and we're not willing to get into a land war with hand-to-hand combat and getting thousands of soldiers killed. Like, we're not going to go down that road. So we're just throwing in the towel. Or is Iran eventually, as their economy just continues to completely implode, do they eventually throw in the towel because of economic reasons and say, okay, yeah, we're going to come to the table and cut a deal, whatever. So I don't know. We'll see what happens. But like I said, I just thought that some of this information was really interesting. Just wanted to share it with everybody. And like I said, then we can kind of go from there and see what happens. So okay. Now I want to talk about, so now back to the gas thing here for just a second. So a couple of interesting articles here that popped out with this. So gas prices may not drop under $3 until 2027, Energy Secretary says. So the average price for a gallon of regular gas is a little over $4 at $4.04, according to data by American Automobile Association. So, pain at the pump might not ease up for American consumers until 2027, according to Energy Secretary Chris Wright, who said on April 19th that the price of a regular gallon of gas could stay above $3 for the rest of the year. Wright said a price of $3 per gallon of gas could happen later this year, but that might not happen until next year. In an interview that aired on CNN's State of the Union program Sunday, but prices have likely peaked and they'll start going down, certainly with a resolution of this conflict in Iran. Wright predicted while speaking about how the war has impacted energy prices. So, okay, so he says this on the 19th during one of like the Sunday morning shows. And then literally, I think this was the next day, Trump comes right out and basically says, no, 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 no. Energy Secretary Wright, he's totally wrong. Totally wrong. Totally wrong. This isn't going to happen. There's not going to be any delay on returning to $3 gas. It's going to go right back down. So again, I think I think this is a rare instance of the Treasury Secretary being honest and telling the truth as to what he thinks is going to happen, and then the president running out basically saying like, yeah, that's not really going to play too well during the midterm. So I got to come out and basically tell everybody that oh no, that gas will be coming right back down here real soon. So I'm kind of in line to I'm kind of going with the energy secretary on this one. That basically we're not going to see $3 gallon gas until probably next year. And again, I talked about this a lot. I think last week. It's not that the U.S. does not depend on that much. We do not need that much Gulf from or that much oil from the Gulf states, right? We get probably about 10% of our oil total from the Gulf states and about 2% from Iran. So it's not enough. We're not getting anywhere near enough oil from them that it's really any kind of good. This is pure the oil market. This is Wall Street. This is the oil market. This is these guys just basically just killing us, if you will. I hate to say it that way, but that's where they're doing it. So that brings us back here again to just look at our crude oil futures again at the 94.88. So they are, I think, if you're thinking about this, if I'm putting myself in Wall Street shoes here for a minute, okay, if you think about it from their perspective, they probably want to keep the bandwidth to somewhere between $70 and $90 a gallon. That's probably the magic number or the magic range, if you will, for where they'd like to be at. It doesn't need to stay up over 90. It could come back down a little bit below 90, but they'd like to keep it probably in that $70 to $90 range because then they're making a lot of good money at that point. They're making good money. So that's where they would really like to keep. And that's why I have a tendency to believe that the energy secretary is probably a little bit more on point when he says that, this is probably not going to come back down until early 2027, and again, of course, that all depends on the whole this Strait of Hormuz thing getting resolved and getting over sooner rather than later, but we shall see. But like I said, I just thought it was funny that the energy secretary said this, and I thought it was being honest and very to the point. And then Trump came right out the next day. I was like, oh no, it's going back down. It's going back down. Anyway, okay. Let's switch gears here now. Tim Cook kind of shocked everybody at the beginning of the week by basically announcing that he was going to retire. And that got a lot of reaction here. So Tim Cook reactions, Trump, Altman, Buffett, and more on the Apple CEO move. So Apple announced Monday that CEO Tim Cook will be stepping down, assuming the role of executive chairman on September 1st. Cook, who served as CEO for nearly 15 years, will be replaced by John Ternus. President Donald Trump, OpenAI CEO Sam Altman, Warren Buffett, and more reacted to the announcement. So So Apple announcing that he was going to step down. President Donald Trump praised Cook's tenure in a True Social post early on Tuesday, saying it began with a phone call from Tim at the beginning of my first term. Tim Cook had an amazing career, almost incomparable, and will go on and continue to do great work for Apple and whatever else he chooses to work on. Quite simply, Tim Cook is an incredible guy, Trump wrote. Trump continued to praise Cook's work Tuesday morning on CNBC's Squawk Box. I got to know him very well. He's a fantastic person, did an unbelievable job. Google's CEO posted about the transition on Tuesday. Congrats on an incredible run, Tim Cook. Always respected your deep commitment to Apple's mission and best wishes. Tim Cook is a legend, said Sam Altman shortly after the news broke on Monday. I am very thankful for everything he has done, and I am very thankful for Apple. Apple and OpenAI first partnered in 2024, integrating ChatGPT into Siri and Apple's writing tools. Palmer Luckey, founder of Oculus VR, also posted on X, writing "R.I.P. Tim Apple," referring to the famous White House incident with Trump in 2019. Trump mistakenly addressed Cook as Tim Apple during his first term. Cook made light of the remark, replacing his last name with the Apple logo on his Twitter profile. I do remember when that happened. That actually was kind of funny. Luckey left Facebook in 2017. Of course he did. And then Warren Buffett, chairman of Berkshire Hathaway, told CNBC's Becky Quick that Apple would not be the Apple of today without Tim Cook. What he has done with Apple could not be done by anybody I've known, Buffett said. Apple is Berkshire Hathaway's largest shareholder. Covering the world and getting along with countries with all kinds of histories and doing right by the consumer, people who worked for him, certainly the shareholders, which we were lucky enough to be one of. He is one of a kind, Buffett said. So yeah, so basically Tim Cook getting showered with a lot of praise. So he did. I mean, Tim Cook did a really amazing job at Apple, taking Apple to new heights. That being said, I will say that I have been a little critical of Tim Cook over the years, just because it was kind of like, well, what is he really, what products or whatever has Apple really come out? I mean, think about it over the last 15 years. I mean, it's like you've got the Apple TV. Okay, that I don't think that has really. I think it's done okay. I don't think that has really taken off and is really any kind of a major moneymaker for them. Basically, it's all just been kind of changes and upgrades to the iPhone. The Apple Watch, that was already in the works before Steve Jobs had left, and certainly before he had passed away. They had already had prototypes and everything of that. Like that was already well in the pipeline. So and again, all that stuff came out under Jobs. Like when we think about, again, the iPhone, the iPad, the iPod, like all iTunes, like that was all Steve Jobs. Now, again, Tim Cook, I'm not trying to overly beat the guy up. The guy has done a wonderful job there with Apple. Like I said, my criticism, if you will, has always been like, well, where was the next leap forward for Apple? And as we're going to see here in a second, when we go to the next article, Tim might be leaving Apple in a little bit of a lurch here. And the reason being is because Apple's got a kind of a big problem with AI. Like what exactly is their AI strategy? And they're really at a point here where they're going to be trying to play catch up, and that's going to be interesting for them in a number of ways. So let's look at this next article here. So Apple incoming CEO John Ternus faces a defining challenge, fixing the company's AI strategy. So Tim Cook had a highly successful tenure as Apple CEO, but he leaves his successor with a big gap to fill when it comes to the company's position in AI. John Ternus, who was just named Apple's next CEO, will have to show investors how the company can win in AI, where it's been a laggard compared to its mega cap peers. Apple has been able to survive the AI onslaught thus far, as consumers are still snapping up their iPhones and using them to access services like ChatGPT and Claude. So, all right, so I got to talk a little bit about Apple's business strategy for just a second here. So Apple, for the most part, Steve Jobs was fanatical on having Apple work on kind of what you would describe as a closed loop system. Like, think of iTunes, right? Apple created the iPod, and then you had to, if you wanted to download music, you had to get it from iTunes, and then you had to buy the music through iTunes, and then download it to your iPod and have it on there. So, and then so everything kind of worked in like the Apple ecosystem, if you will. It had everything, everything was a closed loop. Everything was just Apple, 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 Apple. And then, slowly Apple has started to let other designers and developers come in and kind of mess with some of their software a little bit, but they always had closed end software for the longest time. Over, I would say, during Tim Cook's tenure, that has changed in the last 15 years. They are again opening it up to other people. As we alluded to in the last article, they do have a quasi partnership there with OpenAI where they're working with them on some of the AI stuff, but I'm just pointing this out to just basically say that it has not normally been Apple's thing to invite other people in. Apple doesn't usually play well with others in the sandbox, and that is something that is deeply ingrained in their culture. That was one of the Steve Jobs' biggest kind of mantras. Is one of his biggest things. Steve always wanted to kind of create the ecosystem and then have total control over that ecosystem. He didn't want other people kind of meddling in it, if you will. But now Apple is really faced with a different paradigm where they're sitting there and they're saying, okay, we've gotten ourselves behind in the AI race. How are we catching up with that? Do we have the ability to catch up with it by, of our own kind of, our own resources, if you will? So it's an interesting question. Maybe they are. I mean, Apple certainly is a massive company. They have a lot of resources. They could certainly, if they want to turn it on and go into this. But then you could look at it from another aspect. Like I do have a bunch of AI articles. I went over a lot of AI stuff last week, and I've got some more stuff for this week because I really wanted to focus on basically the cost of all this. Like how is this affecting some of these companies out there, particularly like Oracle, right? Like what's happening with Oracle in this regard. So we're going to continue to keep an eye on this. I'm going to have more, like I said, as we get to the AI conversation here, because I need to get into some of the other Fed, this big Fed conversation here in just a second. But like I said, just kind of put a pin in this one for just a second. And like I said, a little bit later in the show, we're gonna come back to this. So. All right, let's get into our Fed news here. So first of the big stories, and this dropped late yesterday afternoon. Of course, typical, they dropped the big news on late on Friday afternoon as everybody's walking out the door, right? DOJ drops the probe into Fed's PAL. So the central bank's inspector general has been asked to scrutinize Fed renovations, but a U.S. attorney said she would not hesitate to restart the probe if necessary. So Justice Department prosecutors have dropped their investigation into Federal Reserve Chairman Jeremy Powell. U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, Jean Pirro, Judge Jeanine, announced Friday in an X post. The move may clear a hurdle blocking the nomination of Powell's potential successor, former Fed Governor Kevin Warsh, from proceeding through the Senate. Warsh testified on Tuesday. We'll talk about that in a minute. And we're also going to talk about Tom Tillis in a minute as well. He is the Republican senator that has been holding basically this whole confirmation process. He's the one that's been holding it all up because he basically said that he would not vote for Kevin Warsh. He would not basically allow this confirmation to proceed until this investigation got dropped. Well, he got his wish. He got dropped. And now, let's see what he does. But to continue on here for a second. So DOJ ends investigation of Fed Chair Jeremy Powell. The decision clears, again, the clear hurdle for Kevin Warsh's Fed Chair nomination. So this morning, the Inspector General for the Federal Reserve has been asked to scrutinize the building cost overruns in the billions of dollars that have been borne by taxpayers, Jeanine Pirro said. So Pirro will receive a comprehensive report from the Inspector General regarding the central bank's renovations of its headquarters in Washington. Accordingly, I have directed my office to close our investigation as the IG undertakes this inquiry. She added, note however, that I will not hesitate to restart a criminal investigation should the facts warrant doing so. The Federal Reserve declined to comment on the decision. And again, we'll talk about what this means with Tom Tillis here in just a second. So Now, again, I mean, I know that she's saying like, "Oh yeah, I wouldn't hesitate to restart the event." That's not going to happen. That's I mean, they're dropping this. That's the end of it. I think they're going to have the inspector general. I think the idea of the inspector general is just to basically lay some egg on Jerome Powell's face. That's really what that is for. I mean, they're going to have this inspector general report. The inspector general report is going to come out and basically say that they're if my guess, they say that they didn't find any massive criminal wrongdoing. Nothing really crazy happened. It was just massive cost overruns. However, they are going to point out probably the opulence of what the renovations that were made, all the amenities and everything that got built in there for the Fed, and how they basically built the Fed Mahal over there in Washington D.C., and basically just how egregiously over the top the spending was, and the ridiculous, like, why do they need a lot of these amenities, all this other stuff. So I think basically they're just going to use that report to basically just embarrass Jerome Powell, and like I said, just throw a little egg on his face on his way, out the door. We probably don't get that report back before he officially leaves, because it's probably still going to take another month or so for Kevin Warsh to get officially nominated as the Fed chair. And that's assuming everything goes, okay, moving forward here. But Powell probably steps down, and then this report probably comes out a few months later. And then, like I said, I think they're just going to use it to just, like I said, throw some egg on his face after the fact. But we'll see. We'll see if I'm right about that down the road. So, okay, now the big question: will he stay or will he go? Will he stay or will he go? With criminal probe over Fed Chair Jeremy Powell faces big decision. So, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell is likely in his final weeks at the central bank helm and now faces a choice of whether he stays on at the institution. With a criminal investigation referred to the inspector general, does he follow precedent and walk away, as most other chairs have done, or stay on for the final 2 years of his term as governor? At the heart of the matter is the perceived threat to the Fed's immunity from political interference. Now, I'm just gonna say this: if Jerome Powell does not leave in the next couple of weeks here, if he doesn't exit stage right, and again, I'm not. If he stays basically until Kevin Warsh is officially confirmed and he's coming in, if he, like I said, if he hangs out for, I don't know, another month or something like that, until this is done and Kevin's officially in or whatever, that's fine. Like, I don't think there's any big deal with that or whatnot. But the fact that if he tries to stay beyond that, I mean, that to me is a disgrace. It's an absolute disgrace, and why he's doing that. Again, one of my big criticisms of Powell is that he plays politics. He plays politics big time. And if he stays on, it's pure politics. It's pure. He is basically just staying there to be a fly in the ointment. He's playing there to just gum everything up, to basically fight, to be a deterrent on Kevin Warsh, to mess up anything that Kevin Warsh might try to do. That's why he's staying. And if he does that, I mean, that is going to be a hot mess. And again, they talk about. Here they talk about, at the heart of the matter is the perceived threat to the Fed's immunity from political interference, which is comical because he is the political interference. He is the problem. If he stays, he's the one who's going to have an effect. It's like I said, when Trump was coming out and berating him, if he knew last year that he should have reduced interest rates, and he didn't do it. And that's what invoked Trump's ire. And that's what got Trump fired shots across the bow and just, riding him like a show pony all day long. And that, so that was all done by Jerome Powell. Jerome Powell did all that. He knew what Trump's reaction, everybody in the world knew what Trump's reaction was going to be when Trump was basically like, okay, man, anytime now you could start lowering rates a little bit. And he just refused to do it. Because of politics, because of ideology. He was there. He was the defense against Trump. He was going to stick it to Trump, like that. I mean, everybody can see that. And and what's funny is that they talk so much about the Fed independence, about how, oh, he needs to, he beats his chest, oh, I'm here to protect the Fed independence and all that. But yet he does more harm than good. And again, if he stays on, and then Trump's like, I want him fired, I want him gone, and then it becomes this big dispute. Can Trump actually fire him? Can Trump get him gone? Then it becomes a big, and I keep saying, I've said this, I said this many times over the last year. You get to a point where Trump might say, hey, you know what, I think it's time to open up that Federal Reserve Act again. I think it's time to make some changes. I think it's time that the president should unequivocally have the power to fire the Fed chief, Fed chair, if the president doesn't like what's going on. Okay. And then of course you do have this probably bigger problem with independence, if you will. So but that would all be brought on by Jeremy Powell's actions. It would all be brought on if he tries to stay and gum everything up. That would be on him. Again, he's like, you can't cry if the Fed loses their independence because Jeremy Powell is doing everything he can to be a problem. Then that's on him. That's on him, and that's on all the people there in D.C. and the people at the Fed that would back him and would cheer him on to do something like that. That's on them. That's on them. They have nobody to blame. If the Fed's independence, which I think is a joke anyway, but if it goes out the window, the only people they have to blame for that is themselves. So, all right. Enough of my soapbox on that. Okay, let's move now. I'm sorry, I got one. Got one left here on Tom Tillis. Okay, Tom Tillis is just, he needs to retire and he needs to go off into the pasture. And now Tom Tillis, he basically drew the line in the sand because Tom is retiring. He's not going to run again. So he's just finishing out the rest of his term. But he was basically saying, hey, I'm not gonna budge. I'm not gonna move. So now, hey, you got your wish, Tom. Okay, the investigation's over. That thing is dead. Now basically shut up and vote for Kevin Warsh. Okay. And let's go. Let's get on with it already. I'm tired of this guy and basically a lot of his nonsense. So anyway, all right. So moving on. Okay. Let's go to Kevin Warsh. So this is kind of interesting. I just wanted to show this just to kind of give everybody a little bit of background on Kevin Warsh. So Kevin Warsh would be the first tech bro Fed chair, how Silicon Valley shaped him. So Kevin Warsh may face questions about his close ties to Silicon Valley when he appears in front of a Senate committee on Tuesday for a confirmation hearing. Warsh ran venture capital investments in tech for investor Stanley Druckenmiller. That made Warsh very wealthy. Yes, it did, to the tune of over $100 million wealthy. Warsh's belief in AI helps inform his desire to lower interest rates. So with his penchant for suits, ties, and sweater vests, Federal Reserve Chair nominee Kevin Warsh doesn't share the rumpled look of many of the Silicon Valley entrepreneurs he calls friends, but they still count him as one of their own. You wouldn't be hanging out with us if you were as normal as you claim to be. Palantir CEO Alex Karp told Warsh on a podcast in 2022. If confirmed by the Senate, Warsh wouldn't just be the wealthiest Fed chair in history, he would also be the most tech savvy and the closest to the tech bro community to ever sit in the office. So Warsh's connection to Karp and other titans of Silicon Valley, such as reclusive PayPal co-founder Peter Thiel, Yahoo founder Jerry Yang, and prominent venture capitalist Mark Andreessen, go back decades, to college at Stanford and to investments made alongside some of them beginning soon after Warsh resigned as Fed governor in 2011. Those connections and his focus on tech investments have shaped Warsh's almost evangelical view of how new technologies will transform the U.S. economy, a view that could change how the Fed runs monetary policy and what rate policies it pursues. From Alan Greenspan to Ben Bernanke to Janet Yellen and Jerome Powell, transitions to new Fed chairs have been marked mostly by continuity. With his long-running critiques of current Fed policy, from the balance sheet to communications to the data used to set policy, Warsh's tenure could mark a significant break in that long stretch. Yes, indeed. So we shall go on to some other things here. So here's what to expect from the Fed's chair nominee from Kevin Warsh's Senate hearing on Tuesday. So, Fed Chair nominee Kevin Warsh, he travels to Capitol Hill. Political independence has been a key question surrounding the search for a successor to current Chair Jerome Powell. In remarks he's scheduled to deliver to the committee at the start of the hearing, Warsh issued a qualified endorsement of Fed independence. The former Fed governor will face questions over a variety of subjects, from monetary policy to banking regulation to his own complicated personal finances. So, okay, fair enough. And moving on. So Trump's Fed pick Kevin Warsh signals approach to rates, what a leadership change means for consumers. So Warsh said that under his leadership, the central bank would remain independent despite the president's push for lower interest rates. Still, a new head could change the direction of Fed policy and have far-reaching consequences for almost all consumer borrowing costs and savings rates. So Kevin Warsh made his case for becoming chairman of the Federal Reserve at a hearing before the Senate Banking Committee on Tuesday. A change in Fed leadership could have far-reaching consequences. For consumers' borrowing costs, experts say. The Fed chair nominee and President Donald Trump's pick to replace current chair Jerome Powell spoke to senators about his approach to rate setting as a preferred lever for fighting inflation. So among the various methods at the central bank's disposal to promote maximum employment and keep prices stable, the Fed has an interest rate tool and a balance sheet tool. Warsh said at the hearing on Tuesday, "My view is the interest rate tool gets in the cracks. It's fairer. The Fed sets the interest rate called the Fed funds rate that banks charge each other for overnight lending. That rate then affects many consumer borrowing and savings rates." So, all right, I'm not going to get into a whole conversation here on different interest rates and stuff like that. Right? I just want to keep going here just to basically say that, he's basically what the takeaway should be is that Kevin Warsh is thinking about changing the way in which the Fed would either make those decisions or look at or consider, whether they increase or decrease interest rates. That, I think, is the big takeaway there. And then we go on to the next thing. So Kevin Warsh gave his preferred way for measuring inflation. It could come back to bite him. So Kevin Warsh said he preferred to follow inflation through a trimmed gauge as opposed to the Fed's favored core price index for personal consumption expenditures. But Bank of America warned that such change may not play out as he hopes. So Kevin Warsh, President Donald Trump's nominee for Federal Reserve Chairman, told lawmakers that he would like the central bank to change its strategy for measuring inflation. But Bank of America economists warned Wednesday that such a reconfiguration, part of a broader regime change that Warsh has promised for the central bank, might not pan out as he hopes. The Fed has long favored the core price index for personal consumption expenditures, known in short as the core PCE, because it excludes volatile food and energy prices. But Warsh wants to go a step further by rooting out extreme price shocks when calculating overall inflation. What I'm most interested in is what's the underlying inflation rate, not what's the one-time change in prices because of a change in geopolitics or a change in beef, Warsh said at his Senate hearing on Tuesday. The measures I prefer are looking at things that are called trimmed averages, Warsh added. We take out all the tail risks, all of the one-off items, and we ask ourselves whether the generalized change in prices is having second-order effects on the economy. Under Warsh's system, Bank of America's said inflation today does not look softer. The bank found a 12-month inflation gauge that's using the trimmed method would have a mean of 2.3% and a median of 2.8% as of February. By comparison, core PCE sat at 3%. Warsh called the current trend in inflation quite favorable during Tuesday's hearings. But then it goes on to say, be careful what you wish for, but behave. said that having this switch may mean energy and food currently excluded would matter more for Fed policy. Even if these shocks get trimmed out, they might still raise the trimmed mean by preventing other shocks from getting trimmed. This is ironic because Warsh also argued yesterday for looking through one-off supply-driven price increases. So in other words, by trimming only the most extreme readings, some more minor spikes in inflation, perhaps caused by food and energy price jumping, could creep into the inflation reading under Warsh's method and cause it to be higher than the Fed's current preferred view. And Bank of America's data showed that occurred in the past. So, how do I want to say this? This is a little weird because this is like not seeing the forest through the trees. And what I mean by that is that both sides here can make, like Kevin Warsh, he could argue that, oh yeah, you know what, I could look at some other data or some other indicators, or I could try to trim off some of the things that are part of the PCE, and we could look at this, we could look at inflation a little bit different. The other economists out there could sit there and argue like, oh, no, you've got to use the PCE and the CPI and the PPI, and you've got to look at these inflation indexes, and that's got to be your guiding metrics and all this kind of stuff, whatever. You can have that argument all day long. I think the bigger issue, and again, one of our takeaways we're going to see here in the next article is basically what Kevin Warsh wants to do with the Fed's balance sheet. So again, if we go, I'm going to show you guys this for a second. So here's the Fed's balance sheet. Now let's go to this, of course, is over the last like 20 years. We're just going to take a look at the last year here, or even if we look at the last 5 years. So Jerome Powell, as we all know, he basically wanted to bring the Fed's balance sheet down basically after COVID. Like, so after the COVID pandemic, when the balance sheet had basically hit almost $9 trillion, Jeremy Powell in basically in March of 2023 basically said, okay, I want to start bringing the balance sheet down. So he basically brought it all the way down to about $6.5 trillion. Okay. In a certain respect, that is good. But as I've pointed out many times here, the problem is in doing this, he drained the repo market. He drained all of the liquidity out of the repo market, and they had to stop here at 6.5 million because they had effectively drained the repo market down to nothing, which was causing basically liquidity shocks in the repo market, which are still, they've calmed down a little bit, but you never know when that stuff is going to start to flare up. So since then, the Fed has been back in buying stuff again. Again, kind of, I call this kind of the quiet QT, quiet quantitative easing, but they've been back in buying in the market, treasuries, bonds, and everything. And now the balance sheet's gone back up to 6.7 trillion. So it's going up another $200 billion. And so, okay, so it's creeped back up here a little bit, but Kevin Warsh, again, going back to the inflation conversation, what Kevin Warsh is saying here, and like I said, we're going to look at a couple articles that detail this here in a minute, but what he is saying here is effectively that I can better influence inflation by managing the Fed's balance sheet. Like, in other words, all this massive money that has been pumped into the economy, this is what has caused the inflation. This is the cause of the inflation, because they pumped basically after the financial crisis, they had about $4.5 trillion sitting on their balance sheet, and they pumped that. They doubled that. They pumped it up to $9 trillion. They pumped almost $4.5 trillion into the economy during COVID. That's why we got the massive jump in inflation. That's why, as they have brought the balance sheet down, notice that interest rates went up, and that helped with the inflation somewhat, but ultimately it was the bringing down of the balance sheet that ultimately coincided with the coming down of inflation. So again, I think what Kevin Warsh is ultimately saying here is that, hey, look, you could argue all day long about the metrics, about what inflation index you want to use or how you want to interpret it, whatever. But the reality is, I don't want to say manipulate, but I can kind of caress or smooth the inflation based on what we do with the balance sheet. And if I can continue to reduce and bring down this balance sheet, I can therefore bring down if I have a better control over the inflation, if I can bring this down, I can further bring that inflation further under control. That's really what he's trying to say. And that sounds great. That sounds wonderful on the surface, but my argument has always been that it's almost impossible to get rid of this balance sheet now because of the side effects it causes. And again, this is where the whole this is where the whole Lords of Easy Money series comes into play. Because hang on, let me grab right here, Lords of Easy Money, Christopher Leonard. If you haven't read it, that's where all this comes into play. Because if you understand this book, you understand why we are where we are, what everything that's happened. I mean, once you understand that the Federal Reserve turned the economy on its head, it turned the economy on its head to create the current situation. And now, to fix it, you would have to turn everything back over. And as we know, you try to turn that thing back over. In the long term, it would be great. Long term, it would work out. It work out wonderful, and we would probably see some boom in a lot of years thereafter. But the pain of turning that thing back over with righting the ship, that could prove immensely painful and could cause a ton of problems in the short term. The kind of problems that get parties thrown out of office, and therein lies your problem, right? Therein lies your difficulty. But let's go back to some of these Kevin Warsh articles here for a second here. So let's look at those. So Warsh embarks on a high wire act of convincing investors without angering Trump. So Trump expects lower interest rates. How Warsh navigates their relationship could shape what he can actually deliver. So Wall Street and Washington will be watching Kevin Warsh on Tuesday for any sign he has an understanding with President Trump to cut interest rates if installed as chairman of the Federal Reserve. Trump will be watching for any sign he doesn't. The High Wire Act starts before Warsh even has the job. Warsh secured the nomination by convincing Trump he shares the president's view that the Fed should be cutting rates. At his Senate confirmation hearing on Tuesday, he can reaffirm that case at a moment when the Iran war has turned economic conditions against it, or begin carefully to distance himself from it. Air cover from Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who last week said he understood why the war had made the Fed hesitant to cut, might have helped Warsh, but Trump publicly overruled Bessent one day later, saying that he didn't agree. Warsh has said almost nothing in public about monetary policy in 5 months, since before he was selected for the job. He broke the silence Monday, saying in prepared remarks for the confirmation hearing that the Fed's independence isn't threatened when elected officials state their views on interest rates. But he also warned that continued inflation would raise public doubts about whether monetary policy independence is worth preserving. The world has changed since the president and Kevin and any other Fed candidate may have talked, said Glenn Hubbard, the Republican economist who served with Warsh under former President George W. Bush. Bringing colleagues along is Warsh's job, he said, and it's hard to believe that consensus would be around an immediate rate cut just given the state of the world. So yeah, I don't disagree with that. And then looking in here, so Warsh pledges independence at Fed hearing. So central bank will maintain autonomy as Trump eyes rate cuts nominee says. So, well, I mean, what else is he going to say, right? I mean, again, you're not going to, part of what he's doing here is he has to win over the Fed. He has to win over Wall Street. He's got to win over the press. And basically he's not going to say that. He's not going to do that by coming in and saying, oh yeah, I'm going to take a wrecking ball to this place, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that. So no, he's going to go out there and basically say, of course, I believe in the Fed independence, and of course I'm going to uphold that and everything. So again, like no real, shocker there, So President Trump's pick to lead the Federal Reserve, Kevin Warsh, told senators Tuesday that he would chart a sharp departure from the central bank's recent approach while promising to maintain institutional independence from a president who has repeatedly voiced his preference for looser monetary policy. The president never asked me to predetermine, commit, fix, decide on any interest rate decision in any of our discussions, nor would I ever agree to do so, Warsh said at the confirmation hearing on Capitol Hill. The hearing laid bare a political standoff that could delay his confirmation past the May 15th expiration of Jerome Powell's term as chair. Senator Tom Tilsley, we talked about that. He was holding it up, but that's over. After the hearing, Senate Majority Leader John Thune called on the administration to wrap up this investigation so Warsh could move forward, which again has happened. So Trump showed no interest in doing so. Again, yeah, but regardless, it still happened. So Warsh, during the hearing, sidestepped the sharpest questions about independence. He cited pending litigation to avoid taking a position on Trump's effort to fire Fed Governor Lisa Cook or on the criminal probe of Powell and the Fed's construction project. He wouldn't answer directly questions from Senator Elizabeth Warren about whether Trump lost the 2020 election. Again, I don't see how that's relevant here. I mean, again, this guy's trying to become the Fed. He doesn't need to get into the whole political conversation, if you will, around Trump's thoughts on election integrity. That's just not necessary. Let's see here. Warsh, during the hearing, acknowledged the president had been public about his preference for lower rates, but argued every modern president has wanted the same thing. Fed independence is up to the Fed, he said, a phrase he returned to throughout the hearing. Again, that refrain did draw some rebuke from Senator Jack Reed, who said Warsh was copping out. You're the leader, he told Warsh. You established the moral and ethical standards and economic principles of the Fed, and you just pass it off to, well, it's not my job, it's everybody's job. That means it's nobody's job. So Warsh spent much of the hearing outlining a sweeping agenda for the central bank, one that he said would break from the Fed's recent approach to forecasting inflation, managing its asset holdings, and communicating with the public. Asked by Senate Banking Committee Chair Tim Scott how he would address affordability, Warsh said the 2021-2022 inflation surge was the legacy of the fatal policy error that the Fed had yet to fully correct when it left rates at ultra-low levels for too long. Yes, bingo. That is the main thing there. So let's say that again. Warsh said the 21-22 inflation surge was the legacy of the fatal policy error that the Fed had yet to fully correct when it left rates at ultra low levels for too long. And what he's talking about is ZIRP, zero interest rate policy, which I have talked about ad nauseum, about how, again, starting after the financial crisis in 08, 09, that the Fed left, interest rates at basically near zero levels for the better part for almost 10 years. And then, of course, after COVID, returned it right back to zero before ultimately bringing it up again after inflation had been unleashed upon the economy. And so that's what he's talking about there. And that's what I had just alluded to just a few minutes ago, that the Fed, with the quantitative easing, with the bailouts, with the ZIRP, with the zero interest rate policy, they turn the economy on its head. And in order to turn it back, there's going to be pain there. If you want to go down that road, that's fine, but it's going to take time. The Fed missed its mark, said Warsh, who previously served as the Fed governor from 2006 to 2011. The critique was pointed. Warsh described the Fed as an institution that has lost its way and wandered outside of its remit. He dismissed the Fed's preferred inflation gauge as a rough swag, shorthand for scientific wild ass guess. Warsh said the central bank's $7.6 trillion balance sheet, which grew dramatically during and after the 08-09 financial crisis and again after the COVID pandemic, had done quite a bit of harm to the Fed's credibility and amounted to fiscal policy in disguise. And he said the Fed had forfeited the political deference that central banks have historically enjoyed. Independence has to be earned, Warsh said. And as the Fed hasn't delivered on those promises, We shouldn't be surprised that we hear politics that are entering the room. The message landed well with some Republicans on the committee who have been critical of the Fed's recent record, but it could complicate Warsh's relationships with the Fed colleagues he would lead if confirmed. They have spent recent months publicly defending the Fed against the kind of external pressure Warsh suggested the institution had brought upon itself. So, well, and again, yeah, I mean, should he be somewhat concerned about the people that he intends to lead as he comes into that office? He should be. He should be. However, that being said, there's no denying that there needs to be change at the Fed. There needs to be change at the Fed, and I have again in comments I have made in the past, when you look at what I call the three amigos, okay, when you look at Jerome Powell, you look at Grandma Janet Yellen, and you look at Helicopter Ben Bernanke. When you look at the three of them, I call them the three amigos. Okay, I believe the three of them have done more damage to our economy than most people realize, and I do believe, and I've said this before, I do believe this. I truly believe this. The day will come, and it might take 20 years, it might take 30 years, but the day will come when people will look back on this, 18, 20-year period with those three leaders of the Fed, and they will say, yeah, this was the worst period in the Federal Reserve. These were the worst leaders of the Federal Reserve. I really believe that is how, that in hindsight, in retrospect, that is going to be the legacy of the three of them. The three amigos ride again. They should do a tour after Jerome Powell gets done. That would be a great idea. The three of them should get together, get the band back together. They could do a little tour. They could go around. They could talk about how badly they messed up the economy and blame everybody else. And it'd be wonderful. It'd be great, right? Sell a lot of tickets, right? But again, I don't think that he can. Again, we want Kevin Warsh to go in there and make some changes. We just do. We want him to go in there and make some changes, and he can't be worried about the feelings of some of the people over there, like whether he's going to ruffle some feathers over there at the Fed. Sorry guys, just like he said, he hit it right on the head. Independence of the Fed has to be earned, and the Federal Reserve has not delivered on the promises that they have made. They have not done a good job. They have done a horrible job, in fact. And so you can't sit there and say that, oh, I did a horrible job, and then say, like, oh, why are people questioning us? Why do people have a problem with our independence or want to take our independence away from us? It's like, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You just can't. And then let's just take a look at this real quick. So some key takeaways from Fed Chair nominee Kevin Warsh's confirmation hearing. So let's go down here. So Federal Reserve independence, we kind of beat that to death. Regime change. Throughout the approximately 3-hour hearing, Warsh championed regime change at the century-old institution through policy and personnel. Citing policy missteps, the 56-year-old argued that the Fed needs significant changes to restore its credibility and ensure it can live up to its dual mandate of price stability and the labor market. Once you let inflation take hold in the economy, it's more expensive and harder to bring it down. And so that fatal policy error going back 4 or 5 years is still a legacy that we're dealing with, he said. I think that means a regime change in the conduct of policy. I think that means a different new inflation framework. Warsh reiterated his support for reducing the balance sheet, though he stopped short of specifying the level he would be comfortable with moving forward. Any changes, Senator, in the balance sheet would be part of a public discussion, debated rigorously. And if and when the central bank comes to a judgment about a new balance sheet policy, which I hope the central bank would be described well in advance, Warsh stated, he would also prefer to see big, robust deliberations at the Federal Open Market Committee's rate-setting meetings. I tend to favor messier meetings than some, where people don't show up with rehearsed scripts, but we can have a good family fight. So yeah, I love it. I love it, man. I can't wait to see the beige book. I can't wait to see the beige book on that one. That's gonna be fun. It's gonna be fun. It's gonna be so fun. Communications. I believe this is where he talked about basically forward guidance. He wants to get rid of forward guidance, and I'm all for that. The future of post meeting news conferences could be in doubt as Warsh did not commit to continuing the tradition that started under Ben Bernanke more than a decade ago. Right now, press conferences are held periodically. If you ask me my true personal opinion right now, Fed chairs and other central bankers around the FOMC, they speak quite frequently. There is no lack of transparency, Warsh stated. But I would say this: I think truth seeking is more important than repetition. Powell adjusted the schedule to have a press conference after each of the Federal Open Market Committee's 8 meetings. Introduced by Alan Greenspan in the early 2000s, forward guidance and the summary of economic projections could also experience some change to telegraph upcoming policy moves and expectations about the broader economy. Walsh told the committee that he does not believe in forward guidance because officials should not be previewing for you what a future decision might be. The Fed tells the whole world what their dots are going to be, what their forecasts are going to be. The Fed's human. Then they hold on to those forecasts longer than they should. I think these are big changes that are needed. And then he gets into disclosures and divestment, where he talked about his money. If confirmed, he would be the wealthiest Fed chair in history. Warsh refrained from diving deeper into his holdings. Instead, he noted that he would work closely with the ethics officials at the Office of Government Ethics and agreed to divest all of his assets upon confirmation and taking office. So and then talk about support from Tom Tillis, whatever. Okay, we talked about that. Here is the one thing I would caution Kevin Warsh on, heavily caution him on. If there is something that could trip him up, and again, he's going in there to ruffle feathers, fine. Okay, so be it. If you're going to do that, you better be squeaky clean. I mean, squeaky clean. Because anything that, like with your holdings, we've got all these issues right now with like potential insider trading on the prediction markets. I got some articles on that. We'll get to that a little later. But we've got all these issues right now with all insider trading in Congress, insider trading with the government actions, and prediction markets and all that jazz, right? And we already had an issue I've talked about this before. We already had an issue a few years ago where a couple of other Fed governors in Boston and Dallas, they got caught with their hands in the cookie jars and had to immediately resign because they got busted insider trading. There was some question as to whether Jerome Powell was involved in that. Now, they quashed that real quick. They didn't clear him, but they quashed it real quick. So again, you don't want to have some scandal like that come up again because he didn't fully divest or he didn't disclose certain things with his wealth and his holdings or whatever. Like, so that's the one thing I would really caution on. If you say you're going to do this, do it and don't mess around with it, because if you leave a door, even you leave that thing even just cracked a hair, the media, when the time is right, the media will drive a bus through it. Okay, so just that would be the one thing I would caution. Okay, so yep. So I think we kind of covered everything here. We covered Fed independence, we covered balance sheet, we covered interest rate discussion, we covered support through Tom Tillis. Now the investigation's over. Covered the Fed balance sheet here. So, all right. So I think we're good there. So now we can move on to some other things. So before I get to this, I'm going to switch gears here for just a second. We're going to get into this is the point in the show where I like to go over economic indicators, and I like to go through. Let me get rid of that there. Okay. So here's our economic indicators, our calendar for next week, if you will. So let's take a look at this for a second here. So on Monday, April 27th, nothing really coming out. On Tuesday, April 28th, we get the S&P Case-Shiller Home Price Index, and then we get consumer confidence, and then we get a ton of stuff on Wednesday and Thursday. So on Wednesday, April 29th, we got durable good orders, durable goods minus transport, housing starts, building permits, housing starts, another building permits, advanced U.S. trade balance and goods, advanced retail inventories, advanced wholesale inventories, and then we have the Fed FOMC interest rate decision, followed by the press conference with Chair Jerome Powell at 2:30 p.m. on Wednesday. And then on Thursday, April 30th, we get initial jobless claims, employment cost index, GDP, personal income, personal spending, PCE index, core PCE index. So we get the Chicago Business Barometer, the PMI, and then we get the U.S. leading economic indicators. And then finally, on Friday, May 1st, we get the S&P U.S. manufacturing PMI and the ISM manufacturing thereafter. So again, nothing on Monday, a little bit on Tuesday, a little bit on Friday, but Wednesday and Thursday this week is when all the action happens. Obviously, the big thing being the FOMC meeting on Wednesday. Hear what Jerome Powell has to say. My guess is they basically hold everything steady. That they don't do anything with interest rates. They just hold everything status quo. No big changes. And they basically just come out and say, we need more data. We need, nothing's really clear right now. We need more data to make a decision, and that yada yada yada. And then that's pretty much how I think that goes on Wednesday. So, okay, let's get to some. Oh, you know what? I want to show everybody that. Let's go to this real quick here. Let's jump over. Okay, so I always like to show everybody. This is one of my favorite things. This is from NACHA, my favorite my favorite acronym in the banking industry. So ACH network sees volume and value increase here in the first quarter. So yes, it does. And we're going to go through this little infographic here for just a second so we can see here. And I am going to make this a little bit bigger here. So as we go through some of this. So first quarter 2026 total ACH network volume is at 8.9 billion. So it's 5 billion in debits and 4 billion in credits. B2B volume grows 9.4%, so 1.9 billion in the first quarter of 2025, up to 2.1 billion in the first quarter of 26. Same day ACH volume increases to 403 million. The value rises 22.1% to 1.1 trillion. And we can see here that basically the volume went from 326 million in the first quarter of 2025 up to 403 million in the first quarter of this year. And then the value increased from 897 billion in the first quarter of 2025 to 1.1 trillion in the first quarter here of 26. And now volume across major transaction types compared to the first quarter of 2025. So healthcare up 4.9% to 131 million. The internet up 5.4% to 2.9 billion. Direct deposit up 1.7% to 2.2 billion. And P2P, in other words, peer-to-peer payments up 18.5% to 129.3 million. So again, very interesting is I like to look at this just so people can see that the volume here basically in electronic payments continues to grow very rapidly year after year. That's why I like to show this. So you can see here that just, ACH volumes are growing, but just, all types of transaction types, whether it's healthcare, the internet, direct deposit, P2P, all just continues to every month, every year, just going up and up and up. So as people continue to adopt more and more digital methods, specifically through ACH, through the ACH network. And so again, very good stuff here to take a look at that. So we went through that. So okay, let's go through some banking news here for a few minutes, shall we? So business inventories grow in February. So in business inventories grew 0.4% in February, and we're up 1.3% from a year ago. Pending home sales rise in March. That's a good thing. Retail sales also increased in March. The FDIC announces relief for Washington banks. So the FDIC announced regulatory relief to facilitate recovery in areas of Washington affected by severe storms, straight line winds, flooding, landslides, and mudslides. So that's good news there. Let's see here. OCC reports on interest rate risk. So the OCC published its spring 2026 report on interest rate risk data gathered during examinations of mid-sized and community banks and federal savings associations. So the interest rate risk statistics report provides data on risk exposures and limits for banks by asset size and charter type. So I will be covering that in more in probably an episode this week. FDIC, banks continue to perform in 2025 as economic conditions slowed. So economic conditions slowed in 2025 and financial market conditions improved during the second half of the year, according to the FDIC's risk review. So, okay. Mortgage applications jumped this week, which was good. Teams advance in the community bank case study competition, as I had announced probably a week or two ago that this year's competition had kicked off. And so the Conference of State Bank Supervisors announced that 15 student teams from universities nationwide have advanced to the second round of the community bank case study competition. So the teams partnered with community banks to examine their approach to interest rate risk, lending decisions, and inflation since 2020. Teams also analyzed how banks manage and maintain adequate capital through various strategies. So we will keep an eye on that. I'll let you know as that competition continues to progress. House committee announces markup hearings for May. So a markup of various measures will take place on Wednesday, May 13th. A subcommittee hearing on modernizing the Bank Secrecy Act will be on Tuesday, May 19th. And then a subcommittee hearing on bank fintech partnerships will be on Wednesday, May 20th. So agencies lower community bank leverage ratio. So the federal banking agencies issued a final rule to reduce the community bank leverage ratio to 8%, as long advocated by ICBA and other banking groups. So the final rule lowers the CBLR requirement from 9% to 8%, the lowest permitted by statute. Extending the grace period from 2 quarters to 4 quarters, subject to a limit of 8 out of the prior 5-year period. And this is designed to encourage broader adoption of the CBLR framework while maintaining strong capital standards to promote increased lending in local communities. So yes, I think that this is great news for community banks out there that will help them with their capital levels. ICBA does support Kevin Warsh for Fed chair ahead of his nomination hearing. So Kevin Warsh is getting some support from some of the different banking groups out there, which is good. This is big news. So Fannie Freddie FHA to accept new credit scoring options. So the Federal Housing Administration announced that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are implementing new credit score models for mortgages. Now I talked about this, but it has been a long time. It might have even been a year since the last time I mentioned this. So, but the Federal Housing Administration and the U.S. Housing FHFA said it will permit the use of VantageScore 4.0 and FICO 10T as eligible credit scoring models for FHA-insured mortgage underwriting. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are updating their selling guidelines with the new scores and implementing or immediately accepting VantageScore loans on a pilot basis from approved lenders. This step advances the full implementation of the Credit Score Competition Act of 2018, signed by President Trump. So yes, so we'll keep an eye on that one and see how it continues to pan out. White House issues warning about foreign AI models. So the White House issued a warning that other countries are conducting campaigns to extract capabilities and proprietary information from U.S. artificial intelligence companies. So more on that a little later. Treasury sanctions Cambodian romance scam network. So the Treasury Department sanctioned a network of Cambodian individuals and entities that have stolen millions of dollars from U.S. citizens using romance scams. So not good there. CFPB publishes ECOA rule. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau published in the Federal Register a proposed rule to amend provisions related to Regulation B, the regulation implementing the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. So they just published in the Federal Register the proposed rules. So obviously there'll be a comment period, and then we'll see what happens with that thereafter. Op-Ed applauds state tax on credit unions that acquire community banks. So a new community banker op-ed applauds Washington, and that's Washington State, their new law requiring credit unions that acquire or merge with community banks to pay business and occupation taxes on those transactions. Now, as I have talked many times, the whole issue of credit unions buying community banks that's been a hot button major topic for the last few years, as that trend has accelerated over the last couple of years. So we've really seen credit unions really stepping forward to buy a lot more banks. And now Washington State has basically they put this tax through that basically said, okay, Mr. Credit Union, if you want to buy a community bank, you could do that, but you're going to end up paying a tax in order to do such a thing. So, okay, so very interesting. We'll see if other states follow suit in that. My guess is probably not, but we'll see. Okay, ICBA and others request extension of comment periods for Genius Act proposals. So ICBA and other groups asked the Treasury Department, FDIC, Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, and the Office of Foreign Asset Control to extend the comment periods for their respective Genius Act proposals. So in a joint letter to the agencies, the group said that because the active proposals rely on unfinished Genius Act regulations from the OCC, the deadline should be pushed to 60 days after the issuance of the OCC's final rule. So we'll see if the OCC grants this. But obviously, Genius Act, that crypto legislation, all revolves around stablecoins. So very, very important piece of legislation. So we'll see what happens in regards to that one. So, okay. ICBA and others support changes to OCC supervisory appeals system. So ICBA and other groups said the OCC's proposed changes to its framework for banks' appeals of supervisory decisions would restore confidence, bolster accountability, and improve transparency in the appeals process. So yes, I think this would be a very good thing. We've been following, this has been something that has been building for quite some time. So hopefully that will continue. I think that would just really help with just a lot of the overall relationship, relations between banks and that OCC, the regulator. So hopefully that does get worked out, because I think in the long run that would be a really good thing. So, all right, House panel advances. ICBA supported 1071 reform bill. The House Financial Services Committee advanced ICBA advocated legislation to exempt most community banks from small business data collection and reporting requirements under Section 1071 of the Dodd-Frank Act. So the committee voted 26-22 along party lines to advance Chairman French Hill's Small Lender Act. The bill would exempt community banks under $10 billion in total assets from the 1071 reporting, exempt banks that originated fewer than 2,500 small business loans in each of the previous 2 calendar years, and define a small business as one with gross annual revenues of $1 million or less in the most recently completed fiscal year. So again, and just so anybody who doesn't know what the 1071 rule is, basically in a nutshell, what that was that the government, and this was 1071 was originally part of the Dodd-Frank Act, but it found its way into the CFPB. And the CFPB basically said, yes, we want to, after a decade or longer, we want to finally enact the 1071. So and I apologize for all the background there, but I'm trying to give just a little context on this. So what therefore is the 1071? The 1071 is collection of a number of data points that are not currently being collected on small business customers, small business owners, basically. So, and the best way I can describe this to people who maybe aren't in banking or whatever, they're watching this, is that when you go for a mortgage and you fill out the mortgage application, you're now getting the mortgage. The banks are required to collect certain demographic information on you. You can decline to give it, but the bank is basically still required to fill it out, basically take a best guess, fill it out, send it in to the government so the government can track all that demographic information. That has not really been the case, or that has not really been so with small business lending. And the government, for a long time, a lot of the government regulators have wanted banks to collect pretty much to give them a treasure trove of new data related to small business owners. And that's really what the 1071 rule is. So what French Hill and some of the other Republicans are trying to do here is to basically say, hey, we're not going to do all that right this minute. We're going to exempt a lot of smaller banks from having to comply with this. So that's basically what's going on with all that right there. And then, of course, the follow-up to that is the CFPB's 1071 final rule could come this week. The CFPB could release its final rule to implement Section 1071 of the Dodd-Frank Act as soon as this week. So, okay. And we shall see if that does in fact happen. The Federal Reserve's Fed Governor Waller said Mideast conflict influences rate decisions. Yes, the breaking news. Agencies issue revised model risk management guidance. So the FDIC, the OCC, the Federal Reserve issued revised model risk management guidances that clarifies that modern risk management should be tailored commensurately to the size, complexity, and model risk profile of a banking organization. Yes, couldn't agree with that more. So, all right, that is basically a bunch of our banking news for the week. And let me just see, like, before we get to our episodes, was there anything else that I wanted to hit on here? I don't think so. I don't think necessarily I wanted to hit on some of that. All right, so let's go into the episodes that I put out this week. So I had 7 episodes out this week. I had 2 bonus episodes that were basically just clips from last week's live stream. But the first one I did happened last Sunday, and that bonus episode was called "Is It Time to Rein in AI?" So, I did a whole conversation on AI last week. Which basically looked at David Sachs, who was the White House AI and crypto czar. He has now become co-chair of the Tech Advisory Council, expanding his role. Mr. Sachs has advocated that the White House barrel forward with AI development, completely disregarding any associated risks. Last week, Scott Besson and Jerome Powell called an emergency meeting with every major bank CEO to discuss Anthropic's new AI system, Mythos. Mythos has the White House extremely worried because it finds bugs in older software at alarming rates. These bugs would allow hackers to get into the company's systems and cause an extreme amount of damage. The White House is now scrambling to head off this threat. Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei was summoned to the White House on Friday to meet with the Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles. So, and all this, of course, is happening as Gen Z grows more skeptical and angrier about AI. And this all, of course, beckons the question, should AI be reined in? I, for one, think that it should. So again, and we're going to continue. One of the things in that AI discussion last week that I talked about, I asked the question, Anthropic got blackballed by the government because they wouldn't release certain things to the government, right? So, and I asked the question, did they release, not necessarily release Mythos, but did they put that out there as basically like a threat to get the government to come back to the table to basically play ball? I think there's now a couple of the articles I'm going to show you here in just a few minutes. I think there's actually a lot of merit to that, and we'll see why in a few minutes. Okay. Now, getting into my episodes for this week, on Monday, I did a review of the FDIC state profiles for the fourth quarter of 2025. I love the FDIC state profile reports because they're just one-page PDF reports on each. It has a great little chart on the Fed website, which I show in the episode. You could click on any state in the country, and it basically gives you a very quick one-page rundown of all the key metrics and stuff that you need to see there, just to try to, hey, how's the state performing overall? And I think that could be great, especially for a lot of bankers out there. Especially if you're just a community bank, you're operating in one state, and maybe you're doing some reports or some analysis for your board. Great little reports to kind of slip in and say, hey, here's a quick snapshot of how the state is doing overall, and maybe we could kind of compare that to some of our numbers, that kind of thing. So, all right. And then on Tuesday, I did an M&A update for the first quarter of 2026. So bank M&A activity started 2026 doing okay. Not lighting the world on fire, not bad, just okay. Deal volume in the first quarter was slowed to the same level as the first quarter of 2025, with basically 36 and 35 transactions respectively. So pretty much the same. Bank CEOs and executives agree that the window for M&A is still open, but geopolitical problems are slowing things down, and many bank CEOs were questioned about potential mergers on first quarter earnings calls. Many emphatically shut down any suggestion of a potential merger. There have been rumors about Citibank needing to purchase a regional bank to bolster their deposit base in the U.S. There are regional banks such as Truist and PNC that could either be targets or could be on the hunt. We don't know. Additionally, worldwide M&A activity was strong in the first quarter, with 11 deals with total transaction values over, or I should say, 11 deals that had total transaction values over $10 billion. Total transaction value of $305 billion was the best since the second quarter of 2019. So again, I love doing those M&A updates. Gives people a great look at what's going on, great snapshot into the banking world and what is happening in banking. So, and then on Wednesday, I did the GAO, Government Accountability Office. The GAO finds a massive amount of government fraud, or rather fraud within the government. So the Government Accountability Office released a bombshell report on April 15th, disclosing a massive amount of fraud in the U.S. government. After analyzing data from fiscal years 2018 through 2022, the GAO estimates that the federal government lost between $233 billion and $521 billion annually to fraud. The fraud was perpetrated in three main ways. Number one, you had a misuse of pandemic relief funds. Number two, you had stolen benefits. And number three, you had improper payments. So the U.S. government has a massive fraud problem, needs to be addressed immediately. So again, I thought that was a very important episode, a very important report that came out from the GAO, and basically everybody should be taking a look at that, because the fraud is just off. It's just off the charts. And it's everywhere. It's in every state. I do not believe there is a state in this union that does not have some level of this fraud being perpetrated every day. So it's a problem. It's a massive problem. So, and then on Thursday, I continued my coverage of basically Democrats continuing to drive people from blue states and blue cities. It just keeps getting worse. So the exodus from Democrat-run states and cities continues to increase as they triple down on policies of increases, taxes, and regulation. And I also wanted to point out at the beginning of that episode that phenomenon does not happen just here in the U.S. It also is affecting places like the UK. And I just wanted to point out there that there is nothing that will kill an economy faster than exceedingly high taxes and regulation. So, but this episode went through a series of articles for everything from Fox Business to CNBC to the Epoch Times to Investopedia to the Wall Street Journal, showing how states like Washington and New York continue to increase taxes on the wealthy that are leading to an exodus of people and companies. Some of the topics include Uber co-founder leaving California for Texas, Apollo Management opening a second headquarters in Florida, Los Angeles leading the nation in the mass exodus. Jamie Dimon believes this problem will only get worse unless lawmakers change policies. New tax policies include billionaires tax in California, marriage penalty tax in Washington, Massachusetts town that is proposing a 50% property tax hike, and New York proposed a second home tax. The side effects of these tax policies include California losing advanced industry companies, and towns in New Jersey are seeing a spike in home sales and values as middle class basically gets priced out by the wealthy fleeing New York City to move over to New Jersey. To make things worse, New York Mayor Mamdani is also proposing a global wealth tax. However, all the news is not bad, as the Democratic policies have created what is now known as the Boom Belt, an 11-state region in the southeastern U.S. This region has absorbed 70% of all U.S. population growth in the last 5 years, which has now created a GDP of $9 trillion. I mean, amazing. These 11 states, the Boom Belt, now has a GDP combined of $9 trillion, which is larger than many countries around the world. So it's pretty wild. Okay, and then on Friday I did I did Crypto Series episode number 40, or I should say installment 40 in the Crypto Series, and this was called Trump family crypto drama, and the latest and greatest crypto news. So, in this episode, we examine the Trump family crypto drama surrounding their company, World Liberty Financial. While Trump family members and other administration figures' kids appear to have made out in the company dealings, investors have not fared as well. Justin's son is one of the crypto investors who is crying foul. In other crypto news, Strategy continues to purchase more Bitcoin and wants to make its Stretch preferred stock more appealing to investors. The NYSE, New York Stock Exchange, is going all in on crypto. Charles Schwab is launching crypto trading to compete with Coinbase and Robinhood. Kraken is getting ready to announce an IPO filing and the purchase of derivatives from Bitnominal. So again, I thought it was a good installment in the crypto series. A lot of interesting stuff, a lot of interesting drama there with the Trump family around the whole crypto world and everything going on there. So again, check out that episode. Good stuff. And then this morning, I had the second bonus episode this week that went out, was called Private Credit Woes Deepen as Bank Execs Downplay Risks. And basically, I went through a whole further conversation on private credit, which I'm about to get into another private credit conversation here in a minute. But definitely check out that episode if you want to keep up with all of the private credit stuff. So, okay, so those were all the episodes I had out this week. Now, one thing I want to mention real quick here. So let's go in before we get back to our articles here. I want to mention this. So I have a very special interview that's going to be coming out on Monday. It's going to be premiering Monday at noon. I had a chance to interview the author, and I will click out of this for just a second here. So I had a chance to interview the author, this gentleman, Richard Vague, who is the author of this brand new book, The Banker Who Made America. And this is all about the banker Thomas Willing. Phenomenal book here. And this book is basically about Thomas Willing and the rise of the American financial aristocracy. So he talks about the life of Thomas Willing in this book. And I'm going to bring this up here because we can look at Wikipedia here for a minute just to get a little bit of background here on Mr. Thomas Willing. What a fascinating character. What a fascinating character. Now, I should say everybody, but most people basically know Robert Morris as Robert Morris has traditionally been known as the financier of the American Revolution. Very true, but not the whole story. Thomas Willing here was actually partners with Robert Morris, and it was the two of them that played the major role in financing the American Revolution. But Thomas Willing, this guy had like a million. It was amazing. This guy had like a million careers. He was a banker, a merchant trader. He was a politician. He was mayor of Philadelphia. He served in Congress. He was on the Supreme Court, of Pennsylvania. Like this guy did it all, man. And then he eventually rose to become the wealthiest person in the country, which is, just crazy. But yet, he accomplished all this, and he did so much, but yet he is kind of forgotten in history, and he's forgotten for a very big reason. And that reason is he voted against independence. That was the big stain on his life and his reputation. So him being one of the main delegates from Pennsylvania, he voted against independence not once but twice. And his partner Robert Morris, Robert Morris didn't vote for or against it. He just didn't show up the day of the vote. Ben Franklin basically twisted his arm and got Robert Morris to just not show up the day of the vote. So Robert Morris didn't get put on record. However, Mr. Willing did, and Mr. Willing basically went in there and he got lambasted for not wanting to vote for American independence from the British. But regardless of his no vote, it still passed, and the rest is history. But that was the big stain on his career, and I believe one of the reasons why this guy has not been celebrated over the years. Certainly not as necessarily a founding father, and again, one of the big things that gets pointed out in the book is basically the fact that the American Revolution really was a civil war. It was our first civil war in the country, where you had the British supporters, the Tories on one side, and then you had the American patriots on the other. But then you also had a third of the country was kind of neutral in the middle. They didn't want to pick a side. They didn't want to get involved. They just wanted to put their head down and kind of live their life. And that's really where Thomas Willing kind of fit in. He didn't want to pick a side because he had a lot of business interests with the British, and the British had made him fabulously wealthy. So he didn't want to kill the golden goose, but at the same time, he was a patriot. He did believe in America. He saw the possibility there. And that's why he ultimately ended up financing the war with Robert Morris. So again, you can't say the guy wasn't a patriot. He just didn't want to kill his golden goose of all the money he was making with the British. So you could kind of, again, you could kind of understand that where he was kind of coming from in that moment. But like I said, just a couple quick things here. So Thomas Willing, born on December 19th, 1731, lived until January 19th of 1821, was an American merchant, a banker, a politician. He served as mayor of Philadelphia and as a delegate from Pennsylvania to the Continental Congress. He was also the first president of the Bank of North America, which was basically the first bank in the United States. And later he became the first bank. Later he became basically president of the first bank of the United States, which was the first central bank in the U.S. So during his career, Willing amassed considerable wealth as a transatlantic merchant, trading in wheat, sugar, rum, and occasionally enslaved Africans. One account credits him with bankrolling the American Revolution. Another describes him as the richest man in America around 1800. So, and then we're going to skip down here for a second. We're going to skip through kind of the political career and all that, because I wanted to focus on the banking here for a second. So from 1781, now I want you to think about that for a second. What is important about 1781? What's important about that is that was right in the middle of the Revolutionary War. That's right in the middle of the war, man. So the war's still going on. And so from 1781 until 1791, he serves as the president of the Bank of North America, which is basically the bank that was used to finance a lot of the American Revolution. And so, again, it's just very interesting that he was able to operate this bank in the middle of the war when you had the British occupying Philadelphia at a certain point. So it's very fascinating that he, was able to pull that off, you will, without getting arrested or thrown in jail or whatever. So, and then now 1791, George Washington gets elected in 1789. And now, they're starting to really, now that the government, the Constitution's kind of settled, George Washington's president, now they're really focusing their attention on building the American economy and the American banking system. And so now President George Washington, he appoints Willing, along with two others, as commissioners of the newly created First Bank of the United States, basically the first central bank. And this bank was modeled after the Bank of England. The Bank of England is long known as basically the first, you could call it the first modern day central bank. And they were chartered. The Bank of England was chartered in 1694. There was a great book written on the history of the Bank of England. I think it was it's called Till Time's Last Stand, and it's a long book. It's a big long book, but it basically covers the entire history of the Bank of England from 1694. But basically, Alexander Hamilton and Robert Morris and Thomas Willing and a couple other individuals, they get together and they're basically like, hey, we need a central bank, and we need a central bank that's modeled after the Bank of England. And so they come up with the First Bank of the United States. And like I said, Thomas Willing, he gets elected there as one of the three commissioners, but then he gets elected president of the bank later that same year in 1791. And during his tenure, he becomes the richest man in America. And then in August 1807, he suffers a slight stroke, and within a few months, he resigns his position with the bank for health reasons. Now, only 4 years later, in 1811, the bank's charter would be revoked. And then, of course, we would have the War of 1812, the year right after that, with the British coming back in and burning down the White House and all, and everything. Obviously Andrew Jackson, kicking them back with being the hero of the Battle of New Orleans and all that. So, So again, just a fascinating history there. I was so happy again that this author Richard Vague was willing to take some time out with me and do this interview. It's a fantastic interview. I think everybody will love it. Go out if anybody like says if you like history, if you like economics, if you like American Revolutionary history, go check this book out because it is phenomenal. And one of the things that um, I always talk about is the fact that in the American Revolution we always you always hear about Washington and Jefferson and Adams and all a lot of other patriots that fought during the war and all that. And you hear about the Continental Congress, and you hear about the creation of the Constitution and everything. You don't really hear so much about the financial side of it. You don't hear about the problems with the Continental and about how the Continental was a fiat currency that got completely wasted because of how much they printed. You don't hear about kind of the founding of the economic system. Alexander Hamilton has gotten a lot more shine more recently with obviously the play Hamilton and all that. But it's just not an aspect that really gets a whole lot of play, and it's an aspect that I am profoundly have been interested in over the years. And I find some of these characters here, like Thomas Willing, who's like you said, is almost a forgotten character in this whole thing, and yet he becomes at some point the wealthiest man in the United States, and yet he's not. Like I said, he's not like a mainstream founding father. He's not somebody that gets remembered, and that's because of the tarnished stain from his no vote on independence, and that was really the big thing there. So all right. So like I said, that episode is going to premiere on Monday, so definitely check that out if you get a chance. Fantastic interview coming with author Richard Vague. So all right, that being said, let's get back to some of our articles here. So small banks are finally gaining ground on giant rivals. So regional lenders' shares have been boosted by business loan growth. Okay, so shares of smaller banks, unloved, interesting, but by investors in recent years, have been enjoying a rare period in their favor. It may still have some time to run, but at the start of this year, mid-sized bank stocks were roaring back versus their larger peers after 2 years of deep underperformance. The KBW NASDAQ Regional Bank Index, which tracks 50 banks, all with assets under 100 billion, is up about 10% so far this year. The KBW NASDAQ Bank Index includes the giant U.S. Wall Street mega banks and several of the biggest U.S. regional lenders, many of which are essentially nationwide banks. That index is up 3% this year. But in April, the larger bank index has narrowed its underperformance. The biggest banks have just been through a strong earnings season, showing that they grew bigger, more profitable, and more confident in their borrowers. Regional mid-sized banks are still in the process of reporting. Plus, bigger banks are still trading at a sizable premium. I think there's staying power to the premium, says KBW head of U.S. banking research Chris McGrady. The biggest banks have built more stable, diversified businesses. That gets rewarded in the form of higher valuations. However, C&I industrial loan growth is finally picking up again. The market's view of the relative riskiness of financing other lenders has meanwhile grown. Yes, obviously private lending, which we're going to get into here in just a second. But like I said, so far, the regional banks here kind of catching up a little bit on their bigger competitors, even though the bigger banks came through a strong earnings season. If anybody wants any information on that, last week's live stream, I did a whole breakdown of earnings season, so you can go back and check all that out here. So, okay. America is in the middle of a stealth manufacturing boom. So factory jobs are down. Not necessarily so. Factory jobs have actually been increasing all 3 months so far this year, but factory output has risen briskly. Credit goes, you got to love this. Credit goes not to tariffs, but to the most basic economic force of all, demand. Like they will not give Trump any credit for the tariffs. None. It's just like, well, first they were blasting him last year because manufacturing jobs were decreasing. And I kept saying all throughout the year last year, you got to give it time. You got to give it time. You got to wait. You got to wait. Next year, it will start to kick in, but then it will really start to pick up steam in 27 and 28. And that's what I said all last year. And now it's finally starting to kick in. And I did not say that the tariffs would be the primary cause of it, but they would be a big cause of it. And of course, they have to immediately go to, oh, this has got nothing to do with tariffs. It's got nothing to do with tariffs. Like, okay, yeah, okay, all right. You won't hear this from either critics or fans of President Trump's tariffs, but there's a manufacturing revival going on. The reason you haven't heard it is that it doesn't easily fit either political narrative. Critics have focused on the fact that factory jobs have steadily slid since Trump took office last year. Unlike jobs, though, actual factory output has risen briskly and may even be picking up speed. This stealth recovery, though, isn't because of tariffs. Yeah, of course not. Instead, credit goes to the most basic economic force of all, demand. The U.S. is good at making things that happen to be in big demand right now. So, yeah, but it's like you miss the point immediately that the tariffs are what protect that demand. The tariffs are what create that demand because you wait for it. You are using the tariffs to protect industries. It's again, I love this stuff, man. Let's see here. Therein lies a critical lesson in reindustrialization, which has become a bipartisan priority. Governments can help the process along. Really, wow, this is breaking news, everyone. But that involves painstaking efforts across multiple fronts that, wherever possible, need to move with, not against, market forces. It doesn't mean the indiscriminate application of brute tariff force. But okay, all right. But anyway, the point being here is that the reason why I wanted to show this was just to show that manufacturing productivity and jobs, despite what this article says, factory jobs have been increasing the last 3 months. I have pointed that out and I've shown that in various reports over live streams over the last umpteen months. But so this is picking up pace now. It's starting to pick up pace, and it's unfortunate what has happened with the geopolitics with Iran, because I think that if that is overshadowing all this at the moment, and I'm hoping that stuff gets resolved and this continues to pick up momentum, and that this really gets a lot of shine here, particularly over the second half of the year. So, but we'll see what happens with that. So, okay, all right. Let's get into some private credit articles here for a few minutes. So Blue Owl founders revised terms of personal loans that raised scrutiny. So Doug Ostrover and Mark Lipschultz are no longer borrowing against their shares in the fund manager. Well, isn't that nice? So shares in Blue Owl Capital have dropped nearly 40% so far this year amid investor jitters about private credit. Now the firm's co-CEOs removed one drag on its stock by revising the terms of personal loans they took out against their shares. So, all right. So these guys basically are reversing course on that. They're going to stop borrowing against their shares. Whoop-de-doo. Okay, not really going to help them out a whole lot there. But like I said, just something I wanted to point out. Private credit is on the hunt for credit card debt. So fund managers are pouring billions of dollars into agreements to buy the future debt that consumers will incur. So say what now? So Wells Fargo told the fintech Bilt, B-I-L-T, Bilt, that it would no longer be the lender for its Rent Rewards credit card. Bilt scrambled to find another large bank partner. When that failed, Bilt wound up with private credit funding. In February, Bilt struck a deal to move roughly $1.2 billion of credit card balances, with funding arranged by a group including Blue Owl Capital and Stone Point Capital, as well as Goldman Sachs and TD, according to people familiar with the deal. The companies also agreed to fund hundreds of millions of dollars of credit card balances that Bilt cardholders will incur in the future. Consumer debt has become one of the hottest categories in private credit, increasingly sought after by funds and investment arms of insurance companies on the hunt for high yield investments. Now, I talked about the issue with insurance companies last week. That was one. And again, if you guys want to go to the bonus episode I put out this morning, I talk all about insurance companies and the issue that's now percolating in the insurance industry, and about how private credit has infected a lot of these insurance companies, and it is up to the tune of like $1 trillion. So it's not a small thing. So now we get them, again, the problem, one of the problems with private credit is that private credit is like a beast, and you have to feed the beast. So the beast is now, real estate deals and such are slowing down. So now it's looking for other areas. Now it's like a serpent, slithering around looking for other avenues to sink its teeth into. So now it's got the consumer credit card debt. So again, okay, this is great. So again, just another facet of this industry, if you will, that we'll have to keep an eye on. Now, then we get this, and credit risk transfers earn bipartisan praise. Of course, right? Why wouldn't they, right? So Republicans and Democrats alike touted the ability of credit risk transfers to spread risk around the financial system, and spread risk it does. Spread risk it does. With lawmakers especially supporting the tool's utility in housing finance for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. No specific legislation was under consideration during the hearing, but lawmakers' discussions suggest that they have no idea what they're talking about and have no understanding of finance. Oh, I'm sorry. I added that. I added that last one in there. Suggested Democrats are unlikely to make the instruments a top priority for scrutiny if they retake either chamber of Congress in the 2026 midterms. Banks use credit risk transfers to move crappy loans off their book. I'm sorry, did I say crappy loans off their books? They wouldn't do that. No, they wouldn't do that. They wouldn't do that. Yeah, it's just shocking here that both sides of Congress would say this, that basically, oh yeah, credit risk transfers, totally cool, no problem. What is it called? An SR, I think it's called the SRT, specialty risk transfer, is basically the term that is used for, but basically when banks are basically selling loans or moving loans off their books, where they primarily selling it into the private credit market to primarily hedge funds and private equity firms. So, and now the arbitrage trade that's making private credit withdrawals worse. So some investors are exploiting a yawning gap between how similar funds are valued. So not every private credit investor is pulling their money out, is doing that so far out of fear. Some are simply shifting cash from one kind of debt fund to another, capitalizing on the differences in how they are valued. All of these funds hold private loans, but some are trading at a discount to others. Wall Street has a name for trades of this nature: arbitrage. And they have come to a private credit market recently buffeted by a record number of redemption requests from investors, many of whom are nervous about the loans those funds hold. Many of the large private credit funds are called business development companies, also known as BDCs, which make higher interest loans to mid-sized companies and pay dividends to their investors. BDCs come in two flavors: the non-traded variety that allow investors to buy or redeem shares during specific intervals, subject to limits, and publicly traded ones that are listed on an exchange. In theory, the per share price of each type of fund should reflect the fair value of the fund's assets less any debt, a calculation known as net asset value. As sentiment toward private credit began to shift last year, shares of many publicly traded BDCs sold off, trading below their stated net asset value, but the price at which investors can enter or exit non-traded funds has changed very little, thanks to a difference in structure. So some investors are pulling their money from the non-traded BDCs after seeing that comparable public funds are trading at a steep discount. For example, a non-traded Blue Owl BDC known as OBDC2 began suffering from a mass investor exodus last year after shares of its publicly traded cousin, OBDC, fell sharply, but both funds held many of the same investments. So both non-traded and traded BDCs publish their net asset value per share, a calculation that relies on third-party valuation firms and is subjective in nature, given that the loans held by the funds rarely, if ever, trade. With non-traded BDCs, the larger segment of the market that has struggled to contend with mass withdrawal requests this year, investors can purchase shares or replace redemption requests at the fund's stated net asset value per share during quarterly windows. So, the reason you're going to see in a second here, the reason why I point all this out. So just bear with me here for a second here. So now let's go to a moment of truth. Which private credit funds believe their own balance sheets? So at publicly traded credit funds, share buybacks are about to become a key barometer of management confidence. So many publicly traded private credit funds say their assets are worth more than the market is willing to pay. If they really believe that, they should be aggressively buying back their shares. So first quarter reports from the biggest publicly registered credit funds are due soon. For those listed on public exchanges, share buybacks will be a crucial method for gauging management's conviction in their own valuations. The private credit world has been under pressure for months. Such credit funds lend largely to middle market companies, and lots of them have lent heavily to software makers that face potential disruption from new artificial intelligence tools. So much of the attention recently has been on non-traded business development companies. Many of these funds have been flooded with redemption requests by investors looking to cash in their shares, often because they suspect the fund's official net asset values are inflated. As a result, many of the non-traded funds have been forced to gate their investors, invoking long-standing limits that cap quarterly redemptions at 5% of shares outstanding. So now let's keep going on here. U.S. officials try to get a grip on the risks bubbling up inside private credit. In widespread requests, the SEC is seeking information about valuations, loan selection, and other practices by firms. So Wall Street's watchdogs are ramping up their inquiries into how much risk was built up in the $3 trillion private credit industry, just as investors' angst has sparked some backers to head to the exits. The Securities and Exchange Commission in recent months has opened several enforcement investigations of large private credit managers, according to people familiar with the matter. The Treasury Department has requested information from private fund managers and insurance firms about their business models. Bank regulators, too, have stepped up their focus on the risks posed by the industry, with the Federal Reserve querying banks about their lending and exposure to private credit. Regulators have been watching for risks stemming from the growing private credit market for years, but the recent outreach added to scrutiny amid a wave of withdrawals, slowing inflows and dropping stocks. People familiar with the latest action said the agencies have been acting separately, but discussed the turbulence during a recent meeting of the Financial Stability Oversight Council. None of the regulators are sounding dire alarms yet, and Trump administration officials have said publicly they don't think losses in private credit funds would ripple painfully through the financial system. But again, what I wanted to point out here was the valuations, the net asset values, and the valuations. Like that's really what these examiners are trying to focus in on, like the net asset values. Like have you guys overinflated this to a point that this is going to become an issue here? So, and then we get into private equity holdings look overvalued. Who's going to fix it? So short-staffed regulators have their hands full ensuring private equity markets are accurate, industry observers say. So the headline's a little misleading because it's going into private equity, but private equity is one of the main players in the private credit market. So investors are increasingly worried about private equity assets are overvalued, and are questioning whether regulators and auditors will hold firms accountable. So it is widely acknowledged within the private equity industry that many firms' estimated values of their holdings are too high. Fund stakes on the secondary market often sell at big discounts to their net asset values, or NAVs. Last year, for the first time in the industry's recent history, firms on average exited their holdings before their estimated values. Concern about unreliable marks is fueling the crisis in private credit, causing investors to dump assets they suspect are overvalued, particularly in the software sector. Over generous valuations are also contributing to the slowdown in exits because potential buyers won't meet what they consider unrealistic projections. The Securities and Exchange Commission is trying to get valuations back in line with reality, but punishing firms that mismark their companies and auditors that look the other way. The SEC has issued several valuation-related penalties this year and is forming a new group to investigate misconduct by audit firms. The agency wants to crack down on bad actors in the profession and protect investors. But some observers wonder whether the regulator has the capacity to police such a complex issue as valuation when it is hamstrung by staff departures. And I've reported on that in an episode about a week ago, where I covered a lot of the departures at the SEC and the FDIC. So again, just very interesting here that again, we keep coming back to this notion now in these articles this week, this notion of the valuation, the overblown valuations in private equity, thus in the private credit market. So, and let's see here. I think I have, okay. So then this gets into AI, but I just want to wrap. So again, if we go back through these articles here on private credit for just a second. So, okay, yeah, the Blue Owl founders, yeah, not worried about that. But private credit is on the hunt for credit card debt. And then these guys at Congress here, credit risk transfers, totally cool, totally fine. Okay. And now we're looking at the arbitrage trade, basically these BDCs, these business development companies or funds that basically some are private and some are publicly traded. And now they're saying a lot of these people that are looking for the exits are trying to get out of the publicly traded funds and are trying to get into the privately traded funds. Again, because of the whole net asset value thing. Then we get into the moment of truth, which private credit funds believe their own balance sheet. In other words, now we've got this is in full blown, the whole issue of the increased values, the net asset values on a lot of these funds is now out there into question. Now you've got the government officials, the SEC, the Fed, the Trump administration, bank regulators, all trying to now get their handle around this. So now the private equity is going, oh yeah, you know what? This is a commonly known thing that we overblow our valuations. And now they're questioning, like, do the regulators really have the horses, so to speak, to get their arms around this whole thing? So, so again, we'll keep an eye on that and see what happens. So now, getting back to the AI conversation for a minute. So what did I say about 20 minutes ago? Anthropic. I said, did they put Mythos out there to basically mess with the administration, to get the administration to back off them basically being blackballed? And sure enough, what happens here? We have Anthropic probes possible unauthorized access of Mythos AI model. Powerful new tool's ability to facilitate cyber attacks has spooked U.S. officials and companies. So Anthropic is investigating potential unauthorized access to its new Mythos artificial intelligence model, complicating efforts to keep a tight lid on a tool that has spooked the White House and businesses because of its ability to facilitate cyber attacks. So, okay. So now they possibly have this breach here where somehow people got in here. And then immediately, what do we see? Oh, Trump says Anthropic is shaping up and a deal is possible for the Department of Defense use, right? So all of a sudden now a deal is magically back on the table, right? Which is just crazy. And then we have, so President Donald Trump told CNBC that a deal with Anthropic for the for the Department of Defense to use its artificial intelligence model is now suddenly possible again. So the Pentagon labeled the AI startup a supply chain risk at the beginning of March after negotiations broke down. Trump said his administration had some very good talks with Anthropic during a meeting at the White House last week. That's when the Anthropic CEO went to go meet with Susie Wiles. So So again, pretty wild stuff happening here, and now I'm really beginning to think that Anthropic basically put this whole mythos thing out there to basically mess with the White House and to basically say, "Yo, we need to come back into good graces, otherwise, we're going to release this thing, and it's gonna basically wreak insane havoc across the economy and across the U.S. economy." Which is pretty nuts. But then let's take a look at some other AI. So some of the other issues here with AI, right? So Oracle's deluge of AI debt pushes Wall Street to the limit. So the artificial intelligence boom has hit a funding snag, compounding power constraints and growing public backlash against data centers. So I and this is one of the things that I said last week in the AI talk that I did last week, and that was that, again, they're pushing full bore, and the White House is pushing full bore, right? That may not matter, because when you look at the financials of Oracle and some of these other big tech companies, there, I mean, it's what they want to spend on capex. In other words, the capital expenditures that they want to put, the money they want to put out here on these AI with the infrastructure, with the data centers. It's insane, and it's not going to be able to keep up. And this in and of itself could shut down or limit the AI growth, just because they're not going to be able to build all the data centers that they want. And then, of course, there's the growing pushback from communities across the United States that basically are saying, yeah, we don't want these massive behemoth data centers that suck up all of our water and energy and cause all kinds of problems. We don't want this. So those two factors are going to play a big role, and I think dramatically putting the brakes on a lot of this stuff over the next couple of years. Then we go into Meta to lay off 10% of employees in May. Company says workforce cut of 8,000 needs to run more efficiently and offset other investments. In other words, they are invested so much into AI, into data centers and other stuff, that now they need to lay off employees to help pay for that. Okay, so that's part of what is going on here with these layoffs that you're seeing. It's not, again, I keep saying that the AI stuff is a little bit of a facade, that's not really what's happening here at the end of the day. What's really happening is the need to, first of all, admit that they hired too many people. And then number two is the fact that they need money to pay for these insane capital expenditures that they have for these AI data centers. Microsoft offered its first ever buyout to shape workforce around its AI push. So the company is also changing how it awards bonuses and stock options as it reorganizes workforce around AI efforts. So now you're just going to see every company doing this. Google's going to do it. Amazon's going to do it. I mean, they're all going to be doing this. They're all going to be laying people off, trying to get the cap expenditures up. They're working people to the bone. This is their plan. This is what they're going to try to do. Now, this is interesting. Inside BlackRock's AI transformation. So BlackRock's engineering chief, Nisha Ajitasaria, envisions a future where AI agents handle most processes and human work in smaller squads to oversee them. So BlackRock has been on a tear over the last several years to embed artificial intelligence into nearly everything, from the way it makes investment decisions to how it serves clients and operates internally. Now the firm is beginning to roll out a new platform that will make it easier for employees across the company to quickly spin up AI agents for specialized tasks. So, again, they talk about building more agents. They talk about AI investing. Obviously, the big AI that BlackRock has built is called Aladdin, and Aladdin is they're using Aladdin for all kinds of things, to manage investments, decide future investment trends, like doing all kinds of different stuff. And then they get it to AI for productivity. So just a very interesting article here, just talking about the changes and things going on at BlackRock, how they're implementing AI, and just things that we will really have to keep an eye on, because I'm sure that other companies, State Street, Vanguard, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, all your big players on Wall Street, big investment firms, they're all going to be doing a lot of this stuff that BlackRock is already doing. So let's see here. All right, what else I got? A couple more things here before we get out of here. All right, so Elon. This is one of my big issues with Elon. Okay, look, I love Elon. Elon's done so many great, amazing things. There's a couple things that Elon does that I don't like, and this is one of them. I am not in favor of this in any way, shape, or form. I do not. He's all on this. Oh, we need universal high income, because what's going to happen is we're in elitist parlance. What he's basically saying is that AI is going to come along. It's going to take everybody's job. All these people are going to be out of work. They're all going to become what the elites call, we're all going to become useless eaters. And so the only thing we can do is to just we're just going to have to give everybody this universal high income, right? So what is that? So everybody becomes a millionaire, and how does that work out? It doesn't. It doesn't. There are a number of studies, and I'm actually going to go find some, because because I think it is very, very important. I think this is just a horrific, not a bad, it's a horrifically bad idea for everyone. And I'm going to really push back on this. I do not like this whole concept of universally high income. I do not like this in any way, shape, or I will never support this in any way, shape, or form. And there are a number of studies out there pointing out how the whole idea of like universal basic income, it doesn't work. And I am going to go get some of those studies in some of the live streams in the weeks to come. I'm going to show everybody those studies and explain why this universal high income, universal basic, it's all garbage. It's garbage, and it will hurt and destroy the economy of not only just the U.S., but if this is implemented across the world, it will destroy the world economy. And it's not good. And there's so many levels to this, because it's not just an economic level, it's a moral level, it's a human level, there's just a whole bunch of things to this. So all right. Okay, now Polymarket stuff got a little bit of trouble here. So arrest of a U.S. soldier signals Polymarket's Wild West days are ending. So the case against a gentleman named Gannon Ken Van Dyke marks the first U.S. prosecution for insider trading in prediction markets. So this gentleman, unfortunately, got caught trading, and apparently he made more than $400,000 by betting on the downfall of former Venezuelan strongman Nicolas Maduro. So again, people in the government, if you know about some of this stuff, don't be doing this stuff. Don't be doing this. This shows you like you're going to get caught. You're going to get busted. And then we go into, did a mystery trader tamper with the temperature to win big on Polymarket? So temperature readings at Paris airport earn mystery trader $21,000 and spark probe into alleged tampering with weather station. So prediction markets have spurred repeated allegations of skullduggery in recent months, ranging from insider trading by politicians to suspected rigging of bets on the Ukraine war. Now controversy has erupted in one of their more sedate corners, wagers on the weather. So France's National Weather Service is investigating irregularities at a monitoring station at Paris Charles de Gaulle Airport after a reported anomalous temperature spikes. The spikes led to lucrative payoffs for some traders on Polymarket, the crypto-based betting platform. So again, and this is I've talked a lot about prediction markets the last few weeks, actually the last couple months really, and this is just more par for the course, so to speak, with prediction markets. And this is something that this is what the issues that I see with the prediction markets. There's some things that are very cool about the prediction markets. They really help. Like at the beginning of the show tonight, when I was talking about the whole Iran conflict with the Strait of Hormuz, and basically on Kalshi, they had, hey, we think it's going to take till July or August to reopen up the strait. That kind of stuff is cool. It's interesting. It's like, okay, it gives you kind of a baseline of how to maybe judge or think about certain things, and that's cool. Some of this stuff though is taking it way too far. And you're starting to see a lot of the cracks and the problems with these prediction markets and their rampant betting. So again, just something more to keep an eye on. So all right, now I am going to blow through these last couple of things here. So the Trump administration reclassifies marijuana as less dangerous. The move marks a milestone shift in federal policy, but recreational use remains illegal under U.S. law, even as many states allow it. So this is something we have to keep a big eye on, because what does this mainly mean for banks out there as far as working with, dealing with cannabis related businesses? Will this eventually get legalized? I don't know, but something we have to keep an eye on. Again, the episode that I did on Thursday, where I talked about again the trends of what's going on in these Democrat cities and states, and how the trend of the rich leaving, again, just another perfect example of what I go through in that episode. Ken Griffith pushes back after Mandani features his 238 million penthouse and attacks the rich video. In a letter to employees, Citadel Chief Operating Officer subtly hints at a possible reevaluation of New York City investment. Just again, if you keep pushing back on the billionaires, they can go and live wherever they want. They don't have to live in New York. They don't have to live in Seattle. They don't have to live in Los Angeles. If you keep attacking these people, they're going to leave. And these people own and operate massive businesses, and they're going to take their businesses with them. Just like Ken Griffith here took Citadel out of Chicago and moved it down to Miami. That's just what's going to happen. So, again, I don't have all the answers, but what I know is this is not the answer. This is definitely not the answer to how to handle this. And this is going to blow up in New York City's face. It just is. Okay, Trump calls out Wells Fargo and banks over LA fire response. So the federal government will be looking into banks' actions following last year's fire. The president said in a social media post, the banks must treat those people very fairly as well. Yes, we will keep an eye on that. Trump to probe banks regarding Los Angeles wildfire response. First Citizens to shed the SVB name. So the Raleigh, North Carolina-based lender is dropping the Silicon Valley Bank name in the fourth quarter. So again, this is kind of like final fallout from the 2023 banking crisis. First Citizens acquired basically what was left of Silicon Valley Bank, and they had their name on some product lines and some other things, and now that's basically gone and done away with. So that will be the official end to Silicon Valley Bank, SVB. And might have some more news on that in the next few live streams. We'll see. The Fed faults Georgia Bank over government lending program. So after an exam revealed operational deficiencies with Lagrange, Georgia-based community bank shares, the company was ordered to bolster board oversight and improve its capital position. So CFPB gets pushback over artificial deadline on job cuts. So a workers' union said it took the Bureau more than a year to share its latest workforce plan and questions why the agency seeks approval within a 45-day window. Truist CEO defends the bank's growth plan. So asked about M&A, including whether the bank would consider selling, CEO Bill Rogers said he didn't know how to be more clear that that's just not a priority for the bank. I talked about that in my M&A episode this week. So if you want more on that, go check that out. Americans flock to launch new businesses at record levels. Oh, God, this website drives me nuts. Record levels. What's fueling the entrepreneurial boom? So a majority of U.S. adults and more than 2/3 of Gen Z consider starting a business part of the American dream. The survey mirrors a 2020 surge in business creation that outlined the COVID-19 pandemic that spawned it. New demand for businesses serving the work from home lifestyle created opportunities for entrepreneurs, and federal stimulus made starting a business more financially realistic for many. Okay. And then Trump floats a taxpayer-funded takeover of Spirit Airlines and selling it for profit. Speaking in the Oval Office, Trump said, I'd love to be able to save those jobs. I'd love to be able to save an airline. So I don't know. Maybe we'll see. I'll follow up on that one. We'll see what happens to that. And finally, finally nothing. That's all I got there. All right. I am now going to go into wrap-up mode. Let me get up my story of the week here, and let me get my quote of the week up here. Before we get to that, just a couple of, where's my banners? Where's my banners here? Hold on. Okay. So before we get to those last few items, I just want to say if you are watching the podcast here on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please be sure to leave a review, as that would really help out the podcast and help out the channel. Would really appreciate that. Make sure to visit thebankernextdoor.com. Got the website right up there. A lot of great things on the website. Constantly making changes and upgrades to the website, so keep an eye on that. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube to get all the latest via posts and updates. You can send comments to info@thebankernextdoor.com. So if you have comments, questions, topic recommendations, anything like that, you can send it to info@thebankernextdoor.com. That's how you get a hold of me. I am up on social media at Getter, X, and True Social, but I will tell you that I spend the majority of my time on X. BND is on YouTube, Rumble, and all major podcast platforms. We have new episodes to come out every Monday through Friday at noon, and the BND live stream is right here on YouTube every Saturday night at 8 o'clock. So again, hope to see everybody out there in social media world. Okay, let's go to our story of the week here, shall we? So, okay. Our story of the week is on what is called a Small Business Development Centers, also known as SBDCs. So an SBDC provides free marketing, financing, and business-related assistance to local entrepreneurs. They are found in all states, as well as in Washington, D.C., Puerto Rico, and the U.S. territories. SBDCs exist as a partnership between the U.S. Small Business Administration and usually a local college or university, with the purpose to help foster small businesses and jobs by providing educational resources to business owners and those looking to start a business. So yes, a lot of times I've had people come into me over the years of basically looking for an SBA loan. And a lot of times I tell them, I'm like, do you have a business plan? Do you have projections? Have you fleshed out a lot of the basics? You know, what are you going to do? Who's going to be your bank? Who's going to be your insurance company? Who's going to handle payroll? Who's going to do all these different things? And so a lot of times I tell people that they're just not ready to come to the bank yet. And where do I send them? I send them to the SBDCs, the Small Business Development Centers, because there at the SBDC, they will help them to write the business plan and to flesh out all the finer points and to put together the projected income statement that they're going to need when they come in to apply for the SBA loan. So that's how the SBDCs really come in to the picture. And the best part about it is they are free. They are totally free. So if you want to go work with an SBDC, like I said, it's totally free. You can go down there. You could sit down. You could show them everything. Like if you don't have time to write a business plan, but you've got maybe all the info or all the resources, everything you need to put it together, you could go down there, give it to them, and they could put it together for you. So it's a great thing. So if you don't know about a small business development center, go check out the one nearest you. So, all right. Now let's get to our quote of the week. So this comes to us from Epicurus, from his writings called Letters. So, and this says, "Do not spoil what you have by desiring what you have not. Remember that what you now have was once among the things that you only hoped for." So yes, so basically, so be happy for what you have, basically. Don't always be wishing for something else, because remember, what you currently have once upon a time was something that you only wished for. So, all right, well, that's our quote of the week. So I thank everybody for hanging out with me again here on a Saturday night. I hope everybody has a great weekend out there. Go check out, obviously, sports galore happening right now with NBA playoffs and NHL playoffs and NFL draft and all this other stuff. So like I said, if anybody's sports fans out there, go enjoy all that and have a great week out there. Next week, you'll be back with me for another episode here in the Strategy Room. Take care, and I will see you again real soon.